Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Board of Finance meeting for Thursday, February 18th, 2021 order. First item on the agenda tonight, as is typical, is our public forum. Does anybody wish to address the Board of Finance in public forum? Yes, we see you, Elizabeth Wilson. And we're going to ask you to unmute. See if I do that. And I believe we can hear you now. And just state your address for the record, and you may proceed. Elizabeth, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can hear you. Now we can, yep. Go ahead.
Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Wilson. My address is 27 Hazel Road in Guilford. We are in the middle of a pandemic and the worst economic crisis in the past 90 years. Quote, we're a long way from a full recovery, unquote, Fed Reserve Chair Powell said 3 weeks ago. Demographics in the state of Connecticut have been changing as our population becomes older. Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging estimates that 30% of Guilford's population will be age 65 or older in the next 4 years by 2025. That's up 22% from 2015 when we completed the new high school. In the past 6 years, enrollment in Guilford Public Schools has decreased by almost 10%. That's 334 fewer students since the 2014-2015 school year. 334 lost students is significantly more than the current enrollment in any of our 4 elementary schools. The Board of Education spending per student has increased 22% in that time frame. We've gone from spending $16,160 per student to today's $19,671. The reduction in students is not even across the different schools. The high school actually has had a 2.8% increase in students, while A.W. Cox has had a 25.2% reduction in enrollment, and Melissa Jones a 21.7% reduction. I believe it's time that we close a school, perhaps move 5th grade to the elementary schools and combine 6, 7, and 8 into one school, or close an elementary school and redistrict. I realize that there's a hope that students who are being homeschooled this year due to the pandemic will return next year. But enrollment has declined every year for the past 6 years. This is not a one-year aberration. And we need to be spending money based on current facts and not on hopes. In the past 6 years, taxpayers have invested in a new high school, all-day kindergarten, and an international baccalaureate program. It's time to bring spending into line with the changing demographics and the current economic climate. I would like to see at least a 7% reduction in taxes for all Guilford taxpayers this year, and a further reduction in the following year. And thank you all very much for your service to our community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate the comments. Anybody else wishing to address Board of Finance in public forum? Okay. Thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 2, approval of the regular meeting minutes of January 19th, 2021. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Corrections, revisions. I had a number of them, but if anybody has anything first.
I had one.
Go ahead, Ken.
On page 5 of the minutes, there's a reference from Ms. Trudeau said that they had transferred $200,000 in November and did another transfer in January. I believe that should the words another, the word another should be replaced with 200,000, because I think we had two $200,000 transfers. The first was the one in November, and the second transfer was another 200,000 in January, and there was no mention of the number in there.
Ms. Trudeau, could you confirm that? Where is she?
It does appear,
She's working to unmute.
it does appear.
I'm looking for her. I'm like, oh, she's right below my box. Okay, there you are. Yeah, I'm not there you go, Linda.
That is correct. There were 2 transfers, each at 200,000. So we did do a second transfer in January of 200,000.
Okay, so it just needs to be inserted there after another.
Yeah, another transfer of 200,000.
Okay, yep. Okay, thank you, Ken. I will go over a couple that I saw on page 2, second paragraph from the bottom. There was discussion on the Cox HVAC project. Ms. Malvasi noted that, and just removed the word they, I believe, noted that almost all of the 1.2 million is remaining. We'll skip that to standing building. Page 5, third paragraph from the bottom. Although I like ascots, I believe that I asked a question regarding changing of the mascot. I don't wear ascots, but maybe look into it. Expenditures, under expenditures town, page 6. Second paragraph, I guess Mr. Hoey joined the meeting at 8:30 p.m. And then in item number 7, which goes to the vote on page 8, I honestly don't remember. There were 6 in favor. Mr. Trotta is not captured as opposed or abstaining. And I do not remember what Mr. Trotta's vote was on the elderly tax relief program.
Mike, I typically abstain, and I had not noticed that wasn't recorded.
Okay, I just want to make sure because your name didn't appear, so I want to make sure we got it in the right location. So that was an abstention. Okay, on page 9, which is the last page, right at the top, Mr. Ailes said tomorrow and Thursday morning, ... Just for clarification, I believe I did indicate that it was 7:30 p.m. by Zoom for the budget hearings. And then an item I'm sure we'll be discussing later. In the second paragraph, Mr. Hoey noted the governor's executive powers were extended to the middle of, and I believe that is April, not the middle of February. I believe it was April.
I think you're right.
And that is all I have. Anything else on the minutes?
I had one
Jeff?
on page 2, up at the top, first paragraph. Mr. Trotta noted that this work would not be done under the performance contracting, but instead, I think it would be an equipment replacement project, not an equipment placement project, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I could not remember on that one, but it caught my attention as well.
We'll and just so you know, we'll address that briefly. Mr. DeMayo's on standing building. We can recap that issue.
I think the broader not part of the performance contracting.
Yeah.
I think Jonathan might have both of his devices on, which is why we're getting an echo.
Oh, is that the case? Jonathan, is you? Oh. I was going to say, does both of his audios working now? Well, he works to correct that. Is there anything else? Meeting minutes?
Move their approval.
All right, we've got the motion in second, so just all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, abstentions? We were all there, so we're good. Item number 3, under correspondence, Standing Building Committee. So we have Mr. DeMayo on. Thank you for joining us again, David.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So there was some conversation that I realized, I did say I was going to share the information that was shared by Cliff Gurnham and David to us regarding the issue with the Melissa Jones solar. David, I'll spare you because I've got the email right in front of me. I just wanted to share it. And basically, in summary, the JCI rep, Johnson Controls, had responded to Cliff Gurnham saying that under the performance contract at Melissa Jones, they were contracted to install a solar array. But before they had signed the contract, Guilford requested to take the cost of the solar array out of the contract to submit the solar along with the roofing project to the state for an additional 30% reimbursement. So it was a state reimbursement issue is why it was pulled out. This was approved by the state and the savings guarantee remained in the project. So ultimately, the installing of the roof and the solar at the same time saved us money by getting reimbursement from the state. That was the reason why it was pulled out. David, did I capture that as briefly and succinctly as possible?
That's correct. If
All right.
you're going to marry a solar project with a roof project, you can apply for a 30% reimbursement of your roof costs, and that's exactly what was done here.
Great. Okay, so that was the issue that was outstanding from last month that was responded to. Does anybody have anything else on the Standing Building Committee minutes?
I do.
Mr. Gammon, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one. Actually, I have two. The one that I think is simplest first. On page 9, I believe, the HVAC upgrades at Melissa Jones. On the insulation, there's a phrase that the committee uses, which is sensitive areas of insulation to be installed. I noticed that the cost for the estimate for insulating the entire area is over $13,000. The estimate for sensitive areas is $3,000. My question is, what do we lose by not doing the whole area? It's a question for David.
Well, if the system is running properly, this is a condensation. This could be a condensation problem. If the system is running properly and staying within the set points, there is no reason for insulation.
Mm-hmm.
There was a case in the situation in the past where the system went out of spec and the piping started to insulate in the attic and caused staining of ceilings throughout the school. But there's areas where a little bit of condensation, well, let's put it this way. I think that the system is upgraded and now there's controls in place to let us know when set points are off so we can attend to the problem. Prior to this HVAC upgrade, there really wasn't any way of knowing that the system was out of set point, and you wouldn't know it until you started to see, damp stains in your ceiling tiles. But there are a few areas that the engineers thought, and I'm not familiar with what areas those are, to be honest with you. I didn't walk the school. There's a couple of areas where they felt it would be appropriate to get some insulation in them in case there was a set point issue and minimize any water staining or damage to ceilings. But the point here is we now have controls in place that are monitored by the school system, by Cliff and his team regularly, and alarms that will signal a set point malfunction that can be addressed really quickly. So hopefully that answered your question.
Good, yeah.
Thank you.
Ken, anything else? You had a second question, or?
I did actually. It's over this joint bays that are being proposed as part of capital.
Mhm.
And now, I don't recall ever, it's probably in there somewhere and I haven't seen it, but the estimate on doing this project that was proposed by the assistant fire chief is between 550 and 650. Is that the first time we've seen that number?
There was a budget that actually my construction company gave to one of the architects that bid on the project, Noise Vote. Tom Gribbin from Noise Vote had reached out to our company. We have a relationship with him, and asked us to give him an idea of what a pre-engineered steel storage bay. And it's in that letter, which was the quote from Noise Vote. I believe I shared it with the committee in January. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have that with me at home here. I don't recall what that value was. Maybe, I don't know, Michael, do you happen to have a copy of that letter that may state that?
I don't believe that I do.
Okay, all right. I can forward it tomorrow. That was a kind of an order of magnitude budget that one of my estimators had put together for Tom just to kind of help with the program. And I don't recall it, but it's in the letter, and there wasn't any drawings or anything at the time. It was more of, okay, we've got this size building we're thinking of doing. It's pre-engineered. It's a storage bay. It's going to have a toilet room and a few other items. What should we carry a square foot? And that's what we really did. We went back to some historical records and data just to kind of set the stage. I did offer to the fire chief that as they develop these drawings, I'm happy to, as my company would be happy to take that budget to a better position once we see some drawings before it does go out to bid as a service to the.
Yeah, I was actually, Matt, I saw you raise your hand. You want to add to that?
Yeah, just as you know, in the capital presentations that Board of Finance participated in, the fire department had two projects. The first of which was the 4-bay garage, and the second one was the training facility. And I think the numbers that are in the meeting minutes refer to the training facility. That's 550 to 650.
Yeah.
The placeholder that we were given at the time, very preliminary numbers, and Dave can certainly validate this through the correspondence with Noise Vote. But they had $1.5 million for those additional 4 bays, which was a conservative number. They had originally come in, we were looking at a number somewhere around 800,000 to 900,000, but that did not include the fit out of the inside of the building. So there are a couple of components there. One is the construction of the building. The second is the fit out to specifically meet the needs of the fire and police department. It's not just a fire department facility, as you may recall from the presentation at the capital budget hearings. It is a dual facility. 2 bays would be for the police department, so they could consolidate some of their storage and also bring some of their vehicles inside. And the other 2 were for the fire department.
Okay, thank you. That was going to be my question, is where it fell in the capital.
It is currently still in capital for consideration under bonding on the town side. And as I say, it's still under consideration. We don't have the definitive numbers.
So Matt, I just was looking at the capital plan and it looked like it was described as a 2-bay.
That was the original proposal, was 2 bays just for the fire department. The modified proposal is now 4 bays on a different portion of the property for the two entities. And I think, as Dave articulated, it was more of and Dave, I apologize if I'm using the wrong terms, Butler style building. It would not have been at the brick and mortar that you see on the existing fire department if they had extended that out by 2 bays. So
Didn't it also include training facilities?
it was yes, a fire and police training facility behind. That's a second separate proposal. That's the one at 650.
Okay.
Just quick question. Do we have any idea what the amount of the rent that would be replaced?
I don't have it, but I think in the minutes, Mike Shove was charged with coming back with cost benefit analysis on that. And I'm not sure that they've dotted their i's and crossed their t's on that yet.
The point I'm getting at is with that savings, fund the interest on a bond.
Yep.
Anything else on building committee? Okay, I think we're all set then. I didn't have anything else. So as usual, thank you, David, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Feel free to stick around as long as you'd like.
Okay.
Bye, David.
All right,
All
take
right.
care, David. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night, Dave.
Bye-bye.
Correspondence item number 2, pension committee minutes. I know we circled a couple of things on this one as well. And I'm sure that Mary Jane or our first selectman may want to add regarding the percentage rate recommendation from 6.25 to 6 for the pension plan. I know we read about it in, I think it was on page, item number 6.2, which is page 3. And there was a, I appreciate the fact that our concerns were brought into the pension committee meeting. So I know that there was some talk about somehow providing another column to get something between 6.25 and 6% based on some of the concerns we had. The recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance by the committee is an assumption rate should be lowered to 6%. So do you want to expand on that at all for the board?
Be happy to, Mike. I'd be happy to. The pension committee unanimously recommended to the Board of Selectmen and asked us to pass it along, that recommendation along to you. Also, our financial advisor is in concert with the pension committee on lowering the rate to 6. As Bob will attest, we have been steadily dropping that rate from a high of 7.5, 5, 6 years ago. And we've been dropping it by a quarter per year to more accurately reflect market returns. And you're right, we did talk about an interim position between 6.25 and 6. Just as a way of backdrop, going from 6.25 to 6 resulted in an increase in the required contribution for the town for the town employees plan and the police plan in the amount of $220,000. So you can basically cut that number in half, and it's about $110,000 increment or a savings if you go back to 6.125. But the Board of Selectmen unanimously endorsed the pension committee's position that we go to 6%.
Questions from the board? And or comments?
Well, one of the, everybody asks why only 6.25 when the markets are raging? And of course, it's not the whole picture just to pick this. We're also looking at the actuarial return, which is what we're left with after we pay out. So, in some cases, even with the great returns we're making, we're not outrunning our obligations. So this is why we dropped the assumption to these levels.
Being looked at as on a longer term rather than just the last couple months.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into it now, but it's just, while these plans are well funded, it might make sense to investigate offering buyouts to somebody nearing, with some years left and funding the differential at these rates and making everybody happy. But that's for another evening.
Bob, your timing is impeccable. I think Mitch Goldblatt may be on this call, or thought he was going to be on this call, but we have reached out to our friends in Madison who just recently offered an early retirement package for some of their employees. The differential between Madison and what we would be looking to do is Madison had some staff consolidations that they were looking to accomplish and have some employees that they may have preferred to retire. At this point, we're not sure that we're in the same position Madison is, but we are investigating the opportunity and we'll do some kind of cost benefit analysis on offering an early retirement. Obviously, that's for those in the defined pension plan. That's the primary benefit to us.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on pension? All right. Shall move on to item number 4, review and accept the report of expenditures for the Board of Education for January 2021. We have several members of the Board of Education on the call. So I know Linda's going to speak, but who is the reviewer for this first?
And Mike.
It's Moira Rader. Well, then I yield the floor to you.
Thank you. It's so good to see everyone, even if it is virtual. So I hope everybody's well and safe at home. Yeah, so I'm the reporter for the January 2021 financial report for the Board of Education. I'll just run through this quickly and try to keep it brief. I know you guys have a full agenda tonight. Expenditures for the month of January were $5,372,270.67. Expenditures and encumbrances through the end of January were 55.72% of the budget as compared to 55.5% last year. Revenue for January 2020 was $12,617.95, which included some funds from Medicaid, some funds from the town COVID relief fund, and some pre-K tuition. Salaries, the percent of budget expended approximates the prior year, and employee benefits, percent of budget expended is higher than the prior year. Purchase services, the percent of the budget expended is lower than the prior year. In our electricity line, it included a payment of the energy performance contract of $380,743.23. And that is offset somewhat by the ZREC credits from Connecticut Light and Power of $45,591.54 and the energy incentives from Southern Connecticut Gas of $278,889. Tuition, the percent expended is lower than the prior year. Supplies and materials, the percent of budget expended is lower than the prior year. Capital, the percent of budget expended is lower than the prior year. We have a credit in our equipment instructional line due to the reimbursement of our technology lease. Transportation, the percent of budget is lower than the prior year. And we have been obviously tracking our COVID expenses and encumbrances for the year. The balance of the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or the CRF grant, $282,376 has been requested, and we should be receiving that, I think, this month because we had noted February. The total of the CRF grant was $473,127. An additional $522,780 has been allocated for the ESSER grant. That's the elementary school. It's another relief, COVID relief grant. We will submit an application for these funds when it is released. So we actually have a running tally of what we're keeping track of all our COVID expenses for the year. Our revenue in terms of grants is just under $440,000, whereas our encumbrances really would be around 1.5 million, but they're just running over just over $1 million at about $86,000. So we're obviously keeping track of that, and we'll have to obviously continue to adjust for that and see how the grants balance out our expenses. We talked about the operating transfer. We did have that additional transfer in January of $200,000 to cover operating expenses for our dining services program. This is something that's happening to every district around the state. So it's just something, again, we're tracking and we're accommodating for this year. So the warrant we are submitting is a total of all payments for the month listed alphabetically. The total of payments listed on the warrant is $2,729,095.44. And that is the report.
Great, thank you, Moira.
Of course.
So I went through all the percentages, and there were a few areas where the percentages were low. It was pretty self-explanatory why they were low in some of those areas based on where we are. For example, I saw just noting coaching under salaries, lunchroom aides, that was just salaries, but most of that was the same. And then the purchase services, there were quite a few that were lower. Again, largely probably because of school not being as much in session physically, but I did have a couple of other questions. Now I'm just trying to see what exactly why I circled them. But the first one I had was on legal. And this really goes to the budget that's going to be presented tonight. The budget last year was over at this time, and it's approaching 100% now. And I think we know the reasoning for it, contract negotiations. But I saw that the budget for next year that's being proposed is the same amount, and yet we've been trending higher. Is there a concern about the $85,000 that's budgeted this year and for next year? It just seems like maybe should it be higher on legal, or is there a reason that it's still the same from year to year? And actually, I'll be fair, that might be a question you could answer during the budget presentation, but I just wanted to note that it was trending almost at 100% already.
Right, we're at 96.5% right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jason and Linda, do we have negotiations that are scheduled for next year? What do we have, Linda, slated for negotiations going into next year?
We have a couple negotiations that will start at the end of this year, going to next year for 1, 2, 3 bargaining groups, I believe.
Yes, that's true. Yep.
And then this year, although we had not scheduled negotiations, with opening under COVID restrictions, we ended up needing to negotiate memorandums of agreement with almost all of our bargaining units for the changed work conditions related to being open under COVID protocols. And so, we might have been able to underspend a little bit this year. That didn't occur because of the COVID, and we just thought that flat funding, we had a conversation about increasing legal expenses for next year, chose not to do that, thought that we could try to curtail in some other areas, have the monies available for the negotiations. We continue to experience some costs related to special education in the legal area as well.
Okay. Equipment instructional under capital. I know that we got a reimbursement. I know that has to do with the lease. It's at 117%. Are we expecting more to bring that down to 100%?
Yes, we have another $150,000, I believe.
Because we're over 90. It looks like 92,000 was the amount that we're over.
Right. And then we still have some more that we can spend out of the lease. It was 350 total. We have to wait for the bills to be paid and the checks to clear before we can submit for reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that lag between when we actually purchase it and we get the reimbursement back.
Okay. Okay. And then my last question, at least on the report, I was looking at the COVID expenses. So we have, and I typed this all in on my board pack. So let's call it $646,000 in a current shortfall, but there's what appears to be $33,756 left to collect, and that was on. I'm just going based on what the 439 year-to-date revenue is that we received out of the grant that was earlier indicated as a total of 473. So we're still waiting on that difference, right?
Two different grants. So there's the
There-
CRF grant
Right.
as
So-
well as the first ESSER grant, which was 117,000. And now then there's the second ESSER grant, which is the 532,000.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
20.
All right. So the total of the CRF grant was 473, but there's also the first ESSER grant that adds to that.
Right.
17.
And 17.
Thank you. Okay. So, based on the amount, so on the grant, it's a second ESSER grant of 522. Do we have any idea what we might be getting in, what percentage of that we're going to get when we apply? What I'm trying to get at is, we're in February, and I know the Board of Education probably does not have any kind of really good hard numbers, so to speak, of where we're heading into April, May as we get to the end of the fiscal year. But where are we tracking now in terms of unfunded from grants, overage on the budget due to COVID?
We were putting together a report for you, Mr. Ailes, that we were hoping to bring to you next month or the month after. That would be specific to COVID spending in this year, what we identified as spent, what we projected through the end of the year, what we thought we could fill with grant offsets, and hopefully to begin to have early projections for you for end of the year surplus that we might be able to project. That would help us then to identify any existing or projected shortfall, and we could start talking about an additional appropriation as necessary. I just have to admit that right now, most of our effort has gone into preparing next year's budget proposal, and we're just in the beginning stages of getting a better handle on everything that I just listed there.
Okay, yeah, I honestly didn't expect there to be any really finite numbers or anything that you could really, give to us. I was probably more curious how much of the ESSER 2 grant of the 522 we might be able to realize back. Is it once we apply for it? Do we have any? Is it 50%, a small percentage, all of it? I'm sure it's not all of it, but just more of a curiosity on that particular grant.
Districts are being given until 23 to spend down those dollars, but there are also districts in Connecticut that are receiving between 30 and 40 million compared to the 520 that we're receiving. Our plan will be to submit for most of it to offset unanticipated expenditures this year. We don't anticipate having a significant amount of this money to spend forward in future years. I'm not exactly sure how they'll respond to that application, but we'll make sure that we only identify approved expenses. And I think we will have enough approved areas in this current year to apply for all of it. And then obviously we'll have to see how that goes and possibly negotiate with SDE moving forward.
Okay, Mr. Hoey, go ahead.
Yes, for some of you who may have listened or saw the governor's proposed budget a week or so ago, he had somehow included the ESSER 2 money as part of his efforts to make up some of the shortfall in some other areas. So Guilford was allocated in the formula that and amounts that they put out for all the municipalities, $261,000 in ESSER 2 money, which it's my understanding really isn't part of a grant program traditionally like ECS or any of the other grant programs. So many of us are sort of unsure of how that is actually going to be handled. We're getting some clarity from OPM, but it will be, I think it goes directly to the school. So we are not including that in any of our revenue projections for fiscal year 22, that is Board of Education money.
Okay.
I wanted to ask a question about the performance contracting money I see. I'm kind of encouraged to see sort of a breakdown and to see these costs and benefits kind of being allocated to the BOE and sort of seeing them here in this summary. So I'm probably going to really hatch this, but I'm just kind of curious what these numbers kind of mean to us. I see that we've got an annual payment for the performance contracting. of about 380,000 and change. And then we've got some credits that we're receiving in incentives, which probably add up to about 324,000, somewhere along there. So we've got a shortfall of about $56,000. And I'm curious, is that the number that we would go after with our contract with Johnson Control if we're not seeing that much savings in our energy costs? And that, I think that question is really for everyone at this meeting, and maybe for Mary Jane. Sorry, Mary Jane.
I'm guessing my answer is going to be very similar to Linda's, because within the budget, there are also additional savings. As we've talked about throughout the year, as we're going through, some of our budgets are showing specific savings in electricity and other utility costs. Specifically on the town side, the library is one of our largest savings, and also in town properties. So you're only seeing the dollars that are actually going in and out specifically for that, but there are other embedded savings within the budget on our side, and I believe the Board of Ed might be seeing the same savings on their side. Linda can answer that.
Yes, we are, and there's also the ZREX credits are paid quarterly. So we've received 2 payments so far. There's another one that's due by the end of February. And then there should be one more. So the ZREX credit should be about $100,000 total for the year. And as you can see, we've received 45,000 so far. So we do have another $50,000 coming this year from that.
Okay, I think my question is that's sort of the missing piece. If we don't know how much we're saving, or else we would know how much to perhaps pursue Johnson Controls for if we're not saving as much as expected. Does that sound more accurate?
It does, Jonathan, and the answer is the same as we've given the last 2 or 3 times you've asked the same question. We are still awaiting the final summation of the energy savings as provided by CGI through Johnson Controls. Actually, Tracy is working with a CGI individual as we speak. It's a current ongoing set of discussions about the preparation of those reports. There's still some uncompleted activities on the Board of Ed side that have held this. I'm not saying the Board of Ed's responsibility, but that have held up the preparation of those final numbers. We have obviously reserved the right and by contract that once we have those numbers, if the savings do not materialize, we will go after Johnson Controls for that difference.
And that's specifically the solar project that the roof, I think,
that's
wouldn't
one of them.
support
Yep,
it.
that's one of the
Roof
projects.
edit, Melissa Jones, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I am sorry, I do keep belaboring the question a little bit. I guess I'm kind of wondering, when there'll be a break in it and we'll realize where we're at. It seems like if not for the solar project delaying it, we probably would have been realizing these payments from Johnson's Control even like a year ago.
That is if the savings have not materialized as per the pro forma in the contract.
True.
I think over the last couple of years, you, at least on the town side, even though we're a much smaller, only 20% of the overall spend, and obviously we're not going to save as much, but I think every departmental utility line has gone down substantially over the last couple of years. And Mary Jane is shaking her head. So, and then there's just this year alone in the facilities budget, there's a $17,000 a year savings in street lights and street lighting.
Okay. Ultimately, I'm just trying to find out at the end of the game if it worked, basically. Right. And if it didn't work, then Johnson Controls may owe us some money.
Right, absolutely. And let's not forget, there is another piece to this, which includes some mechanical upgrades and retrofits that we would have had to expend capital on. And that is all factored into the savings analysis, into the total cost analysis.
Have we reached any agreement this is a complete assumption on my part, since we weren't able to apply the solar to the Melissa Jones building, have we reached an agreement with Johnson Controls and so forth that we'll do some kind of project on another building? And that'll
I'll leave that to the Board of Education.
Well, the Melissa Jones roof project is the other project. The solar was originally designed to be on one of the town buildings. We couldn't fit it there. Then we identified Melissa Jones. That's why it's incomplete. It was a redesign to find another alternative location for panels that couldn't fit in the originally identified location.
Are they kind of in agreement then that the panels on Melissa Jones will give or take be equal to the panels that they expected on the town building?
I think it's ballpark the same size. I have not looked at the figures in a long time. I would need to look back to tell you how close it was, but it was a ballpark, right?
Okay, I mean, is there an ongoing give or take or dispute about that with Johnson Controls, that for the project to be complete, they need X amount of panels in place for the projections to fall into place?
I'm sure there are, you know, as part of the process.
Okay.
Anything else on the report?
I have a question.
Ken, go ahead.
I was looking at the drop off in transportation and the drop off in tuition. And I'm just wondering, in the drop off in tuition, does that reflect the loss of some students? Or is it based on fewer students? Because when you look at the warrants, they're pretty high. I mean, they're pretty much where they've been. That's my first question. Second question relates to transportation, which again, with the buses and everything else, it seems to be, it's down, but it's down modestly. Are fewer students being served than were estimated in tuition and in transportation, especially in special ed transportation?
In tuition, the quick answer is no. This is a result of some placements coming in a little less expensive than we had budgeted, and some students changing placement, including some students who have or will be returning to local facilities. Transportation, I will defer to Linda, because the last time I answered that, I got that wrong.
So for transportation, the regular transportation is timing of the bills. The special education transportation it's actually, the last projection I did, I think it might be coming in just right above budget, at budget. There are some bills that we are behind on that we just haven't received. I just saw a bunch of them come in the mail last week, so we'll be paying them in February. So it's more of a timing issue with both the transportation and the tuition. And I think for tuition, we're down 3 students from what we budgeted.
Mm-hmm.
It is a slight decrease.
In transportation, Mr. Gammon, it's important to remember that we're still running buses 4 days a week. They're not as full, but we're still running buses, even though we're not necessarily moving our full population of students every day.
Right.
Yeah. Regular transportation, we are a month behind. We have not paid. There was a change in the management at the bus yard, and they missed doing one of the bills. So they're working on the bill now, and I should have December's bill hopefully next week. So we are a month behind on their billing right now.
Yeah, I just want to be clear and clarify that it's they're behind. This is historical with them. This is not that we're not paying the bills. It's that they're not invoicing us in a prompt fashion. So
yeah, we did not miss a payment. Exactly right.
Right, and this is historical. It happened. It's happened for many years. It seems like all the bus companies are like that. So,
a question on
I'm sorry, Ken, go ahead. Say it again.
The electrical bill at the high school, is that within range, that $16,000, or is that high? I know the building is considerably, it's almost the equivalent of three other buildings, but is that energy effective?
Are you referring to, are you referring to the warrants and the particular?
Warrants, the warrants on page 7.
Yep, oh, okay.
And
The
are you
high school one is pretty typical.
It is typical. $16,000.
We need to always remember that when that high school was built, there was a lot more infrastructure put in that's run by electricity, including AC, which the old high school didn't have. So it was always pretty much a wash. You were getting a lot more infrastructure and a lot more HVAC or mechanical support from the electrical than the old. So it was really a wash.
I'll also note, and I think the impact is probably most significant at the high school. As we opened this year, we followed state recommendations to increase airflow and ventilation and turnover.
Right.
And so while all of our systems previously had been maximized for efficiency, this year we essentially went in the other direction and we increased airflow and turnover, even though the buildings are not populated to capacity. And so it might be slightly up from previous years because of those adjustments to make sure that we are exhausting the buildings rather than running them at the peak of electrical efficiencies.
That is true. That was based on recommendations from the state.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Well, while we've broached that subject, anything else on warrants or on either of the packets on operations or regular meeting? I'm scanning right now to see if I had anything. I don't believe I did. Nothing else for the Board of Education?
One quick question.
All right.
In the warrants, there were a number of items for tent heater rentals, which I think is great that you're using them during the season. What types of activities are the tents used for? Is it a way to get the kids out and stretch their legs, or mask breaks or that type of thing? And is that something that you plan on doing throughout the winter and the spring?
Yes, primarily they're being used for exactly that, outdoor mask breaks, a breakout location. At this point, now that all the side panels are up and the heat is running, they're not technically outdoor spaces, but they are larger open spaces that we are using. We can spread the students out more widely for mask breaks. At the high school, one is specifically being used for class time, primarily music classes, again, to have a much, we're working on maintaining a 12-foot distance for students if they are playing instruments or singing. And then one is committed to extending the size of the lunch space so that we have more space to spread students out for lunch waves as well.
So they're getting a fair amount of use.
Yes. Maybe not as much as we had originally intended, but we also have a plan in place to determine how many, if any, of the tents that we would keep moving forward. They're getting used. They may not be getting used as thoroughly as we had projected back in August.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anything further? Otherwise, I will go ahead and entertain a motion to accept the report of expenditures of the Board of Education for the month of January 2021 in the amount of $5,372,270.67.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, or recusals? Thank you, Moira. And the rest of the Board of Education. Seemed like quite the team effort there. Item number 5, review and approve a report of expenditures for the town government for January 2021. Mary Jane?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I will start with revenues. Our revenues at the moment are just slightly lower today. We're in comparison to last year at this time. Last year we were at 91.1%. We're at 89.3% now. We are down slightly in tax collection because we did take advantage of another 3-month deferral for tax collection. So taxes are actually not due until April 1st. However, if we look back to where we were July, when we had our first deferral, we were more than 5% lower in tax collection. And right now we're only 2% lower. So we're tracking a lot better this time around. Matt had asked for an analysis of where our tax collection rate is, and the tax collector reported that the tax collection rate for all taxes is only down 0.0% from last year. So I have no concerns for cash flow for this second half of the year. Anybody have any specific questions related to tax collection at this time?
No.
Other than that, most of our departments are trending about where they should be. You'll see that in the actual month-to-date revenue for the selectmen, there is a negative $279,000. That is the amount of the energy performance contract credits that we talked about before that were transferred from the town to the Board of Ed based on the allocation of buildings. So that money is in their possession at this point. Not too many other exciting things to say on revenue. Finance, the interest rates are still very low. We're not bringing in that money. So we're hoping that other budgets will help us out this year by the end of the fiscal year. Is there any other questions related to revenue?
Quick question.
I have a question, Mary Jane.
Sure. Jonathan, go ahead.
Is it okay to go? So
yeah, go ahead.
I think you've mentioned that we are just not able to get the interest that we were getting on the tax revenue money that we were in prior years. Can you tell us what happened? I'm trying to remember. These were the instrument that we were investing in, the RIF or something.
Much of our money is invested in STIF, which is the state, the short-term investment fund with the state. They provide one of the best returns for our money. We do have some money in other investment areas, but that's where the majority of our funds are. And they are down, just like most institutions are. So we're frantically hoping that we can, bring that back up in the long term.
Has their rate of return fallen that drastically?
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about maybe like 95% decrease in the rate of return.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Is there
all of our investments have declined at the same rate, not just them.
Is there any other alternative that would be similar risk that might be more attractive then?
At the moment, I don't know of one if that we're allowed to go into. We can't do stocks and bonds on our own with this money. We're restricted to how we can invest it. So unless someone is aware of an institution that's giving much better rates than anyone else, we haven't been able to find one yet.
No, the short answer is no. It all has to be risk-free money. It's fundamentally money markets. There's no elbow room. Things are going up a little bit. Rates are up 0.25%, but it's not 2 or 3 points higher than when it was when you're in the stiff a few years ago.
Would they allow us to look at treasuries, Bob?
That's pretty much where it is. That's for some of it, but it's all real short-term stuff. So the 10-year note only just crossed 1% the other day. Everything else is de minimis, fractions of a percent. And nobody wants to go in 10-year instruments. So you know, it's got to be liquid, it's got to be safe, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. There's no fun in it at all. There's no creativity.
It's a significant hit, you know, it's $600,000 of revenue or so.
Yeah, but you know, we refinanced a quarter of our bonds and that was 300,000 of it back. So it kind of cuts both ways.
Good point.
Thanks, Bob.
I have one question on revenue on building. Just wondering if you could educate me on this. So building actual month to date was 78,709. When I looked at the building permit fees that we go over under committee reports later, the January 1 through January 31st seemed to indicate 35,000. Where's the differential on that between the 78 in building and the permit fees of 35? I know I'm missing something, but I'm not sure where those revenues are coming from, and it's not clear from the revenue report in the line items. It just basically has a line for permit.
Right. You know, I really can't answer that at the moment off the top of my head, so I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. It's like one of the first times I've ever looked at the two and compared them, and I was like, 78, that's actually, you know, it's not bad. And I looked at the permit fees and I said, oh, it says 35 there. So I just was wondering if I was missing something. So
yeah, I just have to check to be sure that all the fees are actually on that report. You know, that's kind of specific to building. Yeah, I'll look into that and let you know.
Great, thank you. Anything else on revenues? All right, expenditures.
Expenditures, let me just bring it up here. Hold on just a sec.
It did seem pretty.
Yeah, so yeah, pretty much our expenditures are almost exactly where we were last year, 59.9% versus 60.2%. I really didn't have any specific line items to review with you today unless you had any specific questions.
I do not. Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll just move right along. Then we'll go.
All timing.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'll entertain anything on warrants. Special fund weekly. Anything on warrant? I did not have anything on warrant. Mr. Gammerman, nothing on warrant?
Everybody knows we have a really long night tonight. So,
I know.
And obviously,
we're going right through.
Like I always say, you can contact me anytime with questions if something comes up afterwards.
Got it. All right. So the final item is medical monthly projection reports. I think we probably all saw that. How quickly the ISL could go up. As a recollection, we were at 17% last month in terms of the costs, and we jumped to 48.5 in 1 month. And 70 is usually the target to have some savings. So anyway, Mary Jane, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is that unfortunately this January's report is not a good reflection of where we really are. Anthem is migrating to a new computer system, and they have had some glitches in the draws that they take from us. So although maybe the claims at $500,000 may not really be as low as we've been, but for sure they're taking their admin fees, and not only 9,000, they're going to be looking for their usual amounts. But so they are working on trying to get that corrected. Our consultant Joe Spurgeon is on the case, and we're trying to get this corrected. So hopefully by the time we meet next month, we'll see January's figures come in or come out, I should say, in
Update.
February, and we'll be back up to date.
So you think that's what it is, Mary Jane?
Oh, I don't think that's what it is. I know for a fact that's what it is. Yes.
I was like $9,200 admin fees. It just was not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, for sure that is the issue.
Well, whenever that's happened, I mean, even if you look at the year before, you look at what happened in August of last year, it was 6,200, and the next
Yeah.
month was double what it typically is to catch up. So I just think that was going to be my second question is, it's low. Are they going to catch up next month? And the answer to that is yes, they will.
They haven't yet, but I got a couple weeks left. We're trying to get that in. So I don't guarantee it by the end of February, but that is what we are trying to achieve.
Okay.
Mary Jane, have we taken any money out of the medical surplus fund this fiscal year?
No.
Okay, so we're running at a surplus of approximately 1.4 million.
Yes. Of course, we didn't have our fees or our claims come out this month like they would have. So
we have 5 months to go,
it's inflated some.
We're doing pretty well.
Correct.
Anything else on medical? Okay. If nothing else for the town, I'll entertain a motion to approve the report of expenditures of the town for the month of January 2021 in the amount of $1,939,083.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Jeff?
Second.
Jeff? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions, recusals? Okay,
Thank you.
all set. Thank you, Mary Jane. Item number 6, receive proposed Board of Education budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. Thank you to the Board of Education for attending. There's quite a few members, so thanks for being part of this. And at this point, I suppose we'll hand the virtual presentation over to Dr. Freeman, Dr. Bell-Stracy.
Yes.
And would you or are you planning on sharing a screen?
I believe, yes, Dr. Freeman is doing just that as we speak.
Boom,
so
just like that.
just like that, magic.
Okay.
Thank you for having us tonight. We may be joined momentarily by my co-chair or my vice chair, Amy Sullivan, who wanted to be here tonight, but is doing the good work of vaccinating people with the COVID-19 vaccination tonight. So thank you. We are here obviously to present the Board of Education's proposed 2021-2022 budget. Dr. Freeman presented this budget to the Board of Education on January 11th. That budget presented to us represented a 1.49% increase at that time, the equivalent of $918,592. It did represent the lowest proportional increase to the by Guilford Public Schools administration, by this Guilford Public Schools administration ever brought to our board. Since that presentation, the Board of Ed has met with the district leadership team, including the principals and leaders of various departments within Guilford Public Schools. We have met with you, the Board of Finance. We have met with Dr. Freeman, Dr. Crystal, and Mr. Bowden. We have received public comment via email, a few phone calls, and 2 public forums held on January 25th and 26th. To briefly summarize this input, we heard from a considerate number of people asking us to reconsider the proposed reduction of 1 full-time music position at Adams Middle School, which is a position that was a proposed reduction in the budget in response to declining enrollment in Guilford Public Schools. We heard support for the equity officer position and the student teacher residency program, which are two positions that support the school's priority to further develop a culture and instructional practices that foster equity and social justice in our school community. We heard support for the proposed inclusion of 2 additional elementary school art teachers. And we did hear some concern about a reduction in world language at the elementary schools. And lastly, we heard support for the proposed addition of $10,000 in the budget for the girls and boys swim teams, and did receive some requests for even additional funding. The board had 3 high-level considerations: maintaining high-quality student instruction, continued attention to the health and wellness of our students, and most certainly fiscal responsibility. And these decisions were made in the context of the impact of the coronavirus on our students, staff, and our community, and on the declining student enrollment in the district. After many weeks of careful deliberation, the Board of Education made the following decisions. 1, we acknowledged that the budget presented to the board by Dr. Freeman was indeed very carefully crafted and very fiscally responsible, and that it importantly did pay attention to the declining enrollment. The substantive change that we made to the proposal was to change the reduction in the music position at Adams from a full-time 1.0 FTE equivalent to a half-time position. And we did that as a proposed phased approach to enrollment. What I mean by that is that we put, again, a 0.5 or change the reduction to a 0.5 reduction this year, and expect, unless there are changes in circumstances, that the other 0.5 will be revisited next year as we continue to address enrollment concerns. This decision was made because of substantial public input requesting this change, and particularly in consideration of the impact of the pandemic on music instruction. Their music instruction in Guilford Public Schools in terms of instruments and performance starts in 5th grade. This year, none of our 5th graders were able to start instruments, so that we wanted to acknowledge the concern of the public in that sense, while also acknowledging the important approaches that our administration is taking in regards to enrollment. Overall, the changes that the Board of Education made to Dr. Freeman's proposed budget were somewhat minor, again, due to our feeling that he and the administration had crafted a responsible budget. So I will note that we made a necessary correction in the salary page once errors had been noted. So we increased the salary line by $33,849. We added $25,000 to put back in this 0.5 of a music position. And then we reduced the budget at that point by $60,000. We took out $10,000 for the Artist in Residence program, which we felt was no longer a priority, given the fact that we were supporting the addition of elementary art teachers. We reduced the pension line by $40,000, which was a direct result of discussion at the pension committee that this was an appropriate reduction to our budget line, that we were meeting requirements with this reduction. And we took an additional $10,000 out of the proposed retirement savings estimate, bringing that from a $70,000 to an $80,000 reduction. So what the Board of Education is bringing to you is, in fact, still a 1.49% increase from the prior budget year, which represents a $917,441 increase. I am now going to turn this over to Dr. Freeman, who can give you some more detail about this budget.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci. What I'd like to do, if I may, at this point is walk the board through what is in the final budget. So this is, Dr. Balistraci talked about the changes that occurred between the leadership team's budget and the board's final approved budget. What I'll do relatively quickly then is remind the board and the community that this budget begins by going back to our foundational documents, by looking at our values. Without reading these to you, I'll remind the board that this budget, as it is every year, is built upon a mission and a vision that the Guilford Public Schools have established. It is built on a set of board priorities that have remained essentially unchanged over the last several years. It is built upon a specific set of initiatives that we are engaging in this year. And this year, the initiatives look significantly different than they have in past years. One is that we will maintain health and hygiene protocols in our schools for the students who are attending school in person. And we have had students in our schools in person since the very beginning of the school year. Two is that we will work to balance the instructional approaches that are required in this very unusual year. So while we have had students in our schools since day one, we haven't had all of our students in our schools since day one, and we haven't had all of our students in for every day of this school year. We are practicing a blended approach that includes both in-person, in-school learning with at-home virtual distance learning. And that has required a lot of transition and change and learning on the part of our teaching staff. And so that has taken a significant part of our focus this year and will continue to require support moving forward. And then finally, and importantly, even in the face of this pandemic, we have continued an initiative to further develop a culture and instructional practices that foster equity and social justice in our schools. We began that work some years ago. We really began to focus on it last year, and we did not want to walk away from that or use the pandemic as an excuse for walking away from that work. Every budget is built on a set of budget assumptions. It's not new this year, but we always make sure that every decision works toward a safe and healthy school environment, that every decision maintains a dogged focus on instruction, that every decision moves towards extending and improving opportunities, never moving backwards and never maintaining a status quo, and that we are innovative in our approaches. We pride ourselves on not asking for new resources until we have looked at every existing resource, and that we have been creative with those resources. And finally, it's built on enrollment. Enrollment has been declining over a number of years. We project at this moment that next year enrollment will go down by 111 students. That is based on taking the students who are in our schools on October 1st, assuming a static kindergarten enrollment and moving all those grades forward 1 year. I have said, and I will repeat, every year when we make this presentation at this time, we make an enrollment projection, and every year when we actually count students on October 1, we always miss that mark. We always come in lower. We do lose students every year. We have been losing students every year, but I don't believe we're going to lose 111 students this year. I think there will be a decline. I think it will be less severe. I am concerned that there will in fact be an over-enrollment in kindergarten this year, as some students this year stayed home, and those students may be enrolling next year. And we have seen families in Guilford taking advantage of homeschooling at 3 times the rate of an average year. I do assume that some of those students will be returning to our schools next year. The decline that we are experiencing in our enrollment is the blue line. So you can see that we have been on a significant declining trajectory since 2017, 2018. The red line, however, was the decline that we expected to see. We commissioned a demographic study some years ago. Guilford was looked at in the way that many other suburban communities, affluent suburban communities in Connecticut. Our projected line was the red line, and our actual enrollment decline is the blue line. There are a number of other neighboring communities who have experienced the decline as illustrated in the red line. In those communities have made dramatic decisions, such as closing schools. I will note that year over year, as we have been experiencing this decline, we have reduced or repurposed classroom positions at the elementary level, at the middle level. Last year, there was a significant reduction in 6 English language arts classroom positions at Adams, and we'll talk a little bit more about the decline in Adams as we go through the slides. Built on that vision, that mission, those priorities, those initiatives, the budget assumptions and the enrollment that we anticipate coming in next year, as Dr. Balistraci said, this budget at this time stands at $62,445,900. That is an increase over the current year of $917,441, or a year over year increase of 1.49%. The leadership team and the board have worked very hard to present a budget that will meet the needs of our students as we come out of this most unusual school year, and at the same time, that is very responsive to the fiscal realities that the town is experiencing. We absolutely recognize that this is a difficult financial environment. The board could have made an argument that this was a rebuilding year and that we needed to be bringing forward a 3% increase in order to meet the needs of our students after the year that they had experienced. We didn't do that. On the other hand, we could have argued that there's a fiscal reality a fiscal emergency that needs to be addressed, and we could have simply started with a 0% budget. We didn't do that either, because moving too far in either of those directions would have been irresponsible. We believe that the budget we show here tonight is responsible to both of those very much competing concerns. A history of board increases. The last line is the requested increase. It won't change to black on this slide until you, the Board of Finance, and ultimately the voters have finalized this percent. But this is one of the lowest budgets that this board has brought in, that we have brought in the last 10 years. And I do think that that's an important piece to note. The reason, the ways in which we have achieved this budget is that, one, there's a big assumption built into this budget. This budget does assume that we will return to pre-COVID staffing levels. To Mr. Gammerman's question earlier tonight, I think it might have been Mr. Ailes' question, I apologize, about the COVID spending. There are a number of positions in the school district today that were increases, that were unbudgeted positions. From the time that we approved the budget last year, we have added substitutes, we have added health aides, we have added custodians, we have added a few teaching positions to make sure that the schools, as we opened them this year, met state recommendations for safe and healthy schools. We didn't roll any of those positions forward and build them into the budget next year. This is built on an assumption that with more universal vaccinations being completed, that we will be able to return next year at least to regular staffing levels and regular full schedules. I do anticipate that we will still open with some mitigating protocols in place, like plexiglass dividers and universal masking in the schools, and even the continued use of the tents as ancillary spaces. But it's built on releasing those additional COVID positions. Additionally, and really importantly, it's built on really efficient hiring, on the retirement savings that Dr. Balistraci had noted, but more importantly than that, in really efficient scheduling and the redistribution of human resources. We have a slide to share with you later tonight to show that when we make enrollment-driven reductions in the district at elementary classroom positions or in the middle grades, we then reallocate those resources to provide expanding needs in the district, needs around social emotional wellness, needs around mental health, needs around controlling special education expenditures, keeping more of our special education students in the district, needs around professional development for teachers and really demanding educational environments. And we meet those needs not by layering on new resources, but by repurposing resources in recognition of the enrollment declines that we have been experiencing. We've also had really positive medical experience. Medical spending in this budget is below where it was in the 14-15 school year. And our principals and our classroom teachers, there's no other word. They've simply been frugal in their material management. And all of those actions go to controlling the overall spend. The medical spend I just mentioned to you, we have a medical benefit cost built into this budget of about $8.5 million. In 14-15, it was over $9.5 million. This board has worked really hard to renegotiate those benefits with all of our bargaining units so that while we maintain the level of benefit for our staff members, we bring down the costs to the community. And we're really proud of the work that we've done in that area, as well as benefiting, like the town, just from some simple good luck in our medical experiences. By location, this budget highlights that in all of our school locations, spending is flat or down. Again, principals and classroom teachers, and this is in recognition both of the management of those materials, but also in those enrollment declines that we have mentioned. When we see decline in an area, we reduce the materials and the equipment spends in those areas. You will see that there is increased costs associated with special education, facilities. Although it's minor, we still continue to believe that preventative maintenance is monies better spent than repair monies or replacement monies on the back end. Technology increases. This has been a year of focus on technology in our instruction, and athletics. Athletics is the only line that shows here that includes the salary costs associated with it. And I will note that to some degree, that athletic line shows a cost associated with rebranding the high school under a new mascot. We haven't budgeted the full cost. We do anticipate to do some significant fundraising around our new Grizzly mascot to help offset that cost, but there is some monies here to repaint a gym floor and to purchase new uniforms for high school athletes who are now Grizzlies. There are cost drivers in this budget. Every year, I try to make sure that we call out for the board and for the community what are essentially non-discretionary cost increases. The cost per student has increased in Guilford schools because the cost to educate students has increased in Connecticut and across the country. We have contracts with 6 different bargaining units. 85% of our spend goes into salaries. The people who support our children in our classrooms, in our lunchrooms, in the nurses station, all of those positions. So the single largest increase this year, even though we have recognized efficiencies by scheduling and by repurposing human resources and by anticipating retirement savings, the salary increases are still our single largest increase, although the salary line in the budget only goes up by 1.5% when it's your largest figure, and when it's 85% or 65% of your overall budget, that's a significant increase. We are seeing increases in transportation, and that is a result of a 5-year contract, and this is the increase that we negotiated into when we moved into this 5-year contract. We have contracts around safety and sanitations, and there are contractual increases associated with those. Special education tuition is increasing, but I actually want to draw the board's attention to how small that increase is this year. I will show you a graphic that will illustrate what special education spending looks like. Other contracted services, these are often services that we bring into our schools to support students, and then the pension increase. I want to point out for the board that we're showing 4 increases this year that are only 5 figures. I've never put a 5-figure item on this cost increase slide before. It's always been 6-figure increases or more. These are our single largest drivers this year because we don't have a lot of significantly large drivers this year. We've got a number of small non-discretionary increases that have really driven the increase in this budget. When you look at these 6 items combined, that's an increase of $933,000. Remember, Dr. Balistraci noted the entire budget is only increasing by $917,000. So while these drivers are pushing us in one direction, we're finding efficiencies and we're offsetting these cost drivers in the ways that we manage the entire budget. That special education spending that I talked about, This line in this image incorporates tuition, transportation, and contracted services. It does not include special education staffing because it's very difficult to tease out which staff work solely and only with special education students. All of our staff support our special ed, but we've been showing you this figure for several years now. The red line indicates our actual annual spend on special education. The blue line indicates the budget that we set for special education. I want to note that since 2015, if you were to draw a best line through our actual special education spending, that's a really good line. That line is almost flat from 2015 through our projected budget for next year. There's a slight increase, but it's a completely reasonable increase. The other thing that I really like about this budget is that if you look back to 2019, we are beginning to get a handle on what is one of the most variable numbers in our budget, one of the most difficult numbers to predict. And so, right, you're beginning to be able to look back and see that our projected budget and our actual spend are coming into alignment. And we're feeling, again, really positive about that. In large part, this is because of repurposing those human resources. By maintaining more of our special education students at home, we provide them a better service. We have better control over that service. They receive that service with their friends and neighbors, and it allows us to better project those costs moving forward. I'll show this because Mr. Hoey has asked us to continue to show this. But if we were on the increased trajectory that we were on back in 2010 and 11 and 12 and 13, this would be the line that would, if we hadn't changed that trajectory. We take great pride in the fact that we changed that trajectory back in 2012, but I also really want to point out those two positives that you see in the budget trends back to 2017-18 and 2019 when you look at the actual spend and then the budgeted projected spend. This year, even in the face of the pandemic, is not a status quo budget. I have long prided myself on pointing out that I don't believe that Guilford invited me to be part of the Guilford school community to keep things as they were. We all view ourselves as moving this district forward and getting better every day. That's why board members run for their seats. That's why leaders are hungry to work in Guilford, and that's why every teacher comes into school every day. Despite the pandemic, this budget is not different. Now, the investments we make this year may be conservative, but they are important. This budget does include the addition of a new social worker at Guilford High School. At this point, we currently have 3.5 social work and school psychologist positions at the high school. And if you combine both evaluations as well as regular caseloads, those 3.5 individuals are carrying caseloads of about 50 each. That does not include crisis response. It doesn't include walk-in service for students, and it doesn't include consultation and support to classroom teachers. By increasing from 3.5 such positions at the high school to 4.5 such positions, that caseload the average caseload will drop from 50 to 39. It will give those individuals more capacity to be more available for teacher consults, for walk-in supports, as well as continuing the individual supports that they offer at that caseload level. We believe that that's an important investment. We believe it's an important investment district-wide, but particularly at the high school this year. Dr. Balistraci mentioned, and we're really proud to be participating in a teacher residency program this year. Across the state, school districts are offering paid residencies to aspiring teachers of color. I believe that the regional group that we're working in with other districts on the shoreline through the Learn RESC is supporting close to 40 such positions. We'll be supporting one of those positions in Guilford. It will allow us to place an individual into a building sub or a paraprofessional position. That person will work during the day in our schools, drawing a salary, and will attend courses in the evening, achieving a Connecticut elementary teacher certification. And then we will have the first opportunity to hire that person into our district. And the person will be committed to at least 3 years of service in Guilford, as you know, in exchange for the tuition offset that we will be providing. Currently, the cost associated with that tuition for us and our participation in the program would be $35,000, although Learn continues to pursue grants, and we are optimistic that Learn will receive some of those grants and it will lower or in fact remove that cost to us. But we're really excited to be part of that program. Districts along the shoreline as well as across the state are participating in that program. And the number may be 40 or 44 positions statewide. It may not be just in our shoreline area. Additionally, this year, we're looking to provide a family equity liaison. This would be a part-time position. We're anticipating approximately 10 hours per week. But this would be an individual who makes themselves available to students and to families. And if students or families feel that their needs aren't being met or they're not being treated fairly because of their identifying as part of a marginalized group of any type, religious identity, gender identity, racial or ethnic identity, this person would be there to listen to those concerns, to advise, coach the families, to be a liaison between the family and school administration, and really importantly, to report to me regularly so that we're identifying any patterns that we see systemically across our district. The response portion of this position is important, but the proactive learning that will come from somebody specifically in this position and having a district-wide viewpoint, vantage point, and sense of those concerns will help us to get better moving forward. And then again, as Dr. Balistraci noted, there's an increase of $10,000 that would go across the two swim programs this year. This would bring us to a level where the school budget was providing for home Guilford-centric teams for both boys and girls. Currently, the boys are still part of a swim collaborative. This would allow us to provide independent boys and girls swim teams, and the district would be covering fully the cost of a head coach, of all travel expenses, and of all officiating needs. This does not get us to the point yet that additional costs like pool time are being fully covered. It means that we will continue to rely on parental contributions and booster club contributions to help us provide those two teams. We remain very grateful to parents in a number of our athletic programs who help to offset the costs of those programs. Girls and boys ice hockey and crew key among those, as well as the swim community. I mentioned I wanted to show a slide that showed some of that repurposing of human resources and how we respond to enrollment changes in the district. This slide shows that there are no increases in staffing as we move into next year. Again, important to note that coming off of a year of COVID, coming off of a year of reduced contact time for many or most students, if not all students, this budget doesn't increase positions. In fact, in the teaching ranks, responding to the enrollment shifts that we are seeing, we're reducing a classroom math position. We are reducing half of a music position, as Dr. Balistraci noted. There's an anticipation that another half will be reduced next year unless conditions change. We're reducing 2 elementary classroom positions, and we are reducing 2 world language positions. So while we make those reductions in the face of the enrollment declines that we are seeing, we also then look at repurposing those resources. Where does the district at the same time have emergent needs? The community has been asking for several years now to see an increase in art contact time at the elementary schools. And this budget affords for that by increasing from a part-time art teacher at every elementary school to a full-time elementary teacher. This position includes the increase of the school social worker at Guilford High School, as I mentioned. It includes the increase of a new world language offering. We will begin next year offering American Sign Language as one of the language choices that students can elect to study. It increases 2 important positions that are currently part-time, our library media specialist positions that are part-time at 2 of our elementary schools. It brings them up to full-time, and it includes the addition of 1 district-wide technology integration specialist. This is a certified teacher who works in a role similar to an instructional coaching role, helping teachers to better integrate technology into their everyday teaching. For the last 3 years, we had one such position in our district. This year, we doubled that. Obviously, there was an enormous need for technical support this year. We now have 2 individuals who support all 315 teachers, and the transition that those teachers made to blended virtual instruction this year was Herculean, and it will continue to be a need as we move forward. We believe that's an important position to continue. After all those reductions and additions and offsets and repurposing, we still end up reducing the teacher ranks in the district by almost 1 full position, by 0.7 FTEs this year, as well as a reduction in 2.5 district-wide paraprofessional positions this year. And again, no increases. If anything, this rebuilding year, we're going into it with flat and slightly declining staffing rather than significantly increased staffing. And I hold that out as evidence that we are being very aware of and very responsive to the financial side of this crisis, as well as the educational side. There will be a bonding request that accompanies our operational request that moves forward. I want to note that this bonding request is not approved by the Board of Education this time. The board meets Monday evening to finalize and approve this request. And I do want to spend a little bit of time touching on each of these. It's a total request of 6.2 million. But I want to start by noting that the first item on the list, which is the heating, ventilation, and circulation upgrades at Guilford Lakes Elementary School, was originally slotted for last year, and we ended up pulling it off of last year's bonding request because of the way the executive orders impacted our ability to hold a town-wide referendum last year. This request existed last year. The number has increased over last year. The number has increased because last year we were moving that forward quickly. It was based on a square footage estimate that was in front of you. This year it is refined. It is based on actual engineering documents that are ready for bidding. And it includes the addition of the boilers. Last year, the boilers were not included in this bond request. We felt that at this time, their failure is imminent. It made sense to include them in the request. I want to point out that the next item on the list, the Guilford High School turf field and track repair replacement upgrade, while it is here on our list, is also essentially a shared bonding request with the town and with Parks and Rec. In Guilford, the responsibility for all parks and athletic facilities is shared. The Park and Rec is actually responsible for all of the upkeep and maintenance. The school district is responsible for most of the scheduling, and the benefits of the facilities are widely shared across all of the town residents. So as we're looking at a $6.2 million request, I do want to note that 3 million of it really should have been moved forward last year, but couldn't, and 2 million of it is a request that is shared with the town. This request also includes boiler replacements at Cox that are becoming necessary, an elevator replacement at Melissa Jones that is necessary. That elevator is beyond its projected life, and we can't find replacement parts for it anywhere other than eBay. We really need to replace and upgrade the elevator. And then, as we do annually, there is an architectural and engineering amount associated with this so that we can in the future continue to bring you projects that have been engineered and are not based solely on square footage. So again, the Board of Ed has looked at this in their operations committee meetings. The Board of Ed will look at it for final approval in their meeting Monday evening. I know that all of these items have been discussed at the standing building committee level. Mr. Gurnham will be joining us Monday evening to answer any final questions that the Board of Ed has as we bring this forward, again, accompanying our operational request. And finally, I just want to close before handing this to Dr. Balistraci. Our focus next year is returning to normal. Yes, it'll be normal with masks, I'm sure, at least for the first half of the year. But returning to normal for us also means continually looking at what to do better. It is building on the successes of past years, and it is continuing to look forward. We're actually looking at what we can learn from this pandemic experience that will make us a better school district and a more responsive school district moving forward. We're not just retreating to normal, we're returning to normal, and we're learning from this experience and continuing to grow. And normally at this point, we show you some kind of visual representation of our return on investment. We usually like to take for you that per student expenditure and our performance on some of the normative standardized test results that get used all over the state and show you where we stack up. We didn't have standardized assessments that were given last year. Those were canceled in face of the pandemic. We don't have new performance data to show you, other than to once again tell you that Guilford Public Schools continues to be recognized around the state. We're being asked to talk about how we are responding to the realities of this pandemic instructionally. Our reopening plan was looked at by other districts. The work around equity and social justice that we are doing has been highlighted around the state and nationally. If we had standardized test scores, I'm confident that they would look great compared to any other district in the state. If we had had a spring musical last year, I know that it would have won awards. We continue to be a benchmark district in the state of Connecticut, even in these trying times. And as we come out of it, I will continue to be happy to report out to you our return on investment, both the measurable and the immeasurable return on the investment that we make in our schools and in our children here in Guilford. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Balistraci, and I know we're both happy to answer any questions that you have.
Absolutely. I just want to end with great appreciation to Dr. Freeman and his staff for, again, what the board feels like is an incredibly conservative, fiscally responsible budget. I think there are some really important things in here. To us, this addition of a social work position is one that we are fully in support of. We do not know exactly what the needs of our students are going to be when we are full-time, either hopefully towards the ends of this year, certainly next year. But social and emotional wellness is going to be extraordinarily important, as always, and even more important next year. We are excited about the equity position and about the student residency program. This is work that the district is doing that the Board of Ed is fully behind. And again, this budget really addresses some challenging enrollment staffing decisions that that we are going to probably have to continue to think about as this enrollment issue moves into the high school next year. So I just want to thank them for the great deal of attention that went into this budget. I certainly want to thank Mrs. Trudeau for her extraordinary work every year and this year as well in putting this together and answering numerous questions from Board of Ed members as we dove into this budget. And the last thing I want to say is, and carry on the tradition of my wonderful predecessor in this role, Mr. Bill Bloss, is to remark on a couple of figures. We are 74th in per pupil spending in the state of Connecticut, but are one of the top districts in terms of quality. We are a 2019 National Blue Ribbon High School. We happen to be the proud employers of the Superintendent of the Year. We have continued to show, while we don't have them for this past year, high quality student achievement on assessments. So again, we carefully every year look at the quality we want to provide our students, pay attention to the community that both fiscally and in so many other ways supports the students in this district. And we thank you for the time tonight in presenting this budget to you.
Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci, thank you very much. On behalf of the board, I want to thank the Guilford Public Schools Administration and the Board of Education and all the hard work that went into this. For the viewing public, and I don't have to remind anybody probably on this call, we've been a part of this process for quite a while. So everything that's been presented to us is a formality in a way. We've had budget books. Some of us have attended the Board of Education public hearings, on the budget. So all of this is information that has been shared with us, and we're very privy of and have been notified of all these different items. I will remind the board that we have plenty of time on March 2nd and on March 4th to ask questions of the Board of Education. If there's anything pressing, I certainly will entertain. Will not stop anybody from the board of asking a question right now, of course, but we do have plenty of time to do that on March 2nd and March 4th. This presentation was, again, like I said, more of a formality, and the next presentation, in a way, is also a bit of a formality for us. We've been very involved and active in the deliberation. Well, not so much the deliberations of the Board of Selectmen, but all of the department requests and why the departments have been or have requested what they've come forward with. So anybody for the Board of Education have anything pressing that they want to ask right now?
Yeah, I've got a
Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate if maybe they would consider this question, because hopefully it'll give me some clarification for when we meet on March 2nd and March 4th. But I'm wondering if you've considered the impact on the budget if we were to refrain from any expansion in staff. I did some back of the envelope calculations, and it looks like we might be hiring about 4 full-time equivalents at a cost of around $320,000 without considering benefits. So I'm wondering if I've got that anywhere close to accurate. It was kind of difficult to go through some of the exhibits and try to put that number together. But have you determined what would be the impact on the budget if we didn't hire or create any new positions or change any positions from part-time to full-time?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that, Mr. Trotta, but I would contest the premise of the question. We showed that teacher staffing is reducing by 0.7 FTEs. I don't agree that there's an expansion of teaching staff here.
That's only the net, though. It looks like the actual decreases are offset by new staffing and increases in staffing.
Which to my point is not an expansion of staffing. If we were to leave all the staffing positions exactly as they are, we would be at 0. We're actually at a reduction of a position. I think what you're asking is, what would be the impact of taking all of the enrollment reductions that we identified here, and also not responding to the areas of emerging need that we see. So in that case, if we were to reduce, and in one point, I want to point out that one of the exchanges that you're looking at, I pointed out that we will be reducing 2 world language teachers for 2 elementary art teachers. If we were to eliminate the world language teachers and also not increase the art teachers, we would now be reducing programming at the elementary schools. We would be taking away the world language exposure that we provide and not replacing it with anything. That's an example of it.
Earlier, my understanding was the decreases in the world language was because of enrollment.
No, world language is a programming change from world language to art. The enrollment decreases that we identified for you were 2 elementary classrooms, 1 math position, and a half-time music position. So if we were to take those as decreases and then not offset those positions with the social worker that I mentioned, with the American Sign Language position, with
exactly my question.
Right, with the technology integration specialist or with the media center increases. If we were to take those as reductions only, you'd be looking at $175,000 of reduction. And you wouldn't be meeting the needs of students in the areas of social emotional wellness. You wouldn't be meeting the needs of the teachers and the technology support to pull off what they pulled off this year and will need to continue to do moving into the future. What you would be talking about there would be the slow dismantling of a successful school district. If we only took the enrollment declines and had not over the past several years reinvested those positions into special education programming, into social emotional wellness, and into instructional coaching for the teachers, then you wouldn't see the return on the reasonable investment that Dr. Balistraci and I were just talking about. What you would begin is a death spiral in a school system. You would start taking the savings, not reinvesting those savings, and you'd start seeing decreased performance. What we've seen over the years is improving performance by any measure. So I appreciate the question. I just
So I
believe that
understand that you have justifications for adding these positions. I just wanted to kind of come up with a number of how much those positions cost. And I'm just surprised that you're coming up with a number of 170,000, and I'm coming up with a guesstimate here around 320,000. Is there any way to quantify it exactly?
yes. When we calculate teacher FTEs at this level in budget calculation, we calculate those at the entry level salary, roughly $50,000 per one full-time equivalent. If we were to start reducing the positions in the way that you're describing, then we would be following contractual language and we would be reducing from the least senior member of any of those.
I'm not talking at all about the reductions, just the expansion. Just the new hiring, the new positions, part-time to full-time.
So when you add new positions to the budget, we use that same $50,000 price tag. If we are adding a new position, so for instance, the 2 art positions that we are adding, we assume that we will be hiring people who come in at the lower end of the salary scale, not at the higher end of the salary scale. And Dr. Balistraci noted that this budget includes an $80,000 savings based on projected retirement savings. We anticipate that we will have at least 2 or 3 positions in non-shortage areas where we will have a more veteran staff member retire out. We will replace that position with somebody who comes in lower on the salary scale. Therefore, 2 or 3 such changes would generate that savings of $80,000 that this budget anticipates.
I'm wondering if I can kind of email you this estimate. I think I'm pretty close. I've got 4.7 full-time positions being reduced and 4 positions being added for a net of 0.7. So I think I'm fairly close to your actual net figure that you've come up with.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm happy to share this. Well, actually, I think the slide deck from tonight was shared with you in your documents. And what we're talking about is slide number 16. And it shows, right, it shows the increases and it shows the decreases for a net reduction of 0.7. However, we don't work with individual specific salaries. We work with holding amounts because we don't know who's going to retire, who's going to move, who's going to be hired. We budget all of these changes assuming that we're talking about entry-level salaries, not veteran-level salaries. And it will be different every year. There will be some movement every year. And that is what happens at the end of a school year, where we look to see whether we end up needing to transfer dollars into salaries because of a shortfall or whether we have a surplus in that salary line. Again, we've got approximately 600 employees across 6 different bargaining units. And these are large budget numbers. We're not individually calculating.
Well, I hear your $50,000 estimate. Is it fair to say that you might be budgeting $62,000 for a technology integration specialist? I think I got that figure out of the budget material.
Absolutely, right. So yes, but
that one's a little higher than 50.
Well, no, we had one in the budget this year. We're adding a second one for next year. I can't tell you today what the actual salary of those individuals may be, but yes, right. In broad terms, we're talking about $50,000 for each of these salaries.
Okay, I thought I came across a figure of 62, and then I was wondering if it included benefits.
No, we're talking about salaries. We're not talking about associated benefits. Benefits don't just accrue to the individual employee, but they have families that come with those as well. And so we calculate the number of lives that we will be insuring annually. And we do that with a look back, and we do that with a calculation that we receive from Mr. Spurgeon. We don't do it individually based on, we don't know who we're going to hire next year and whether they're going to be single with no children or whether they're going to be married with a family of 6. And so we don't calculate benefits in the same way that we calculate salaries.
Well, part of the question was really to get some clarification and see if I could email you and get exact figures.
I'd be happy to go through
weeks.
Yeah, I'd be happy, Jonathan, to go through the individual numbers with you. But again, I want to make sure that here, as we're talking in public, that we do not view this as an expansion of staff. Our staffing this year will be 0.7 FTEs smaller in the teaching ranks. It will be 2.5 positions smaller in the paraclerical ranks, and it will be static in all other ranks. I'm happy to talk about reallocation of resources, human resources, but I don't view that as an increase. And I don't want to suggest that the assumption is that the school district should always take the reductions that are demanded by enrollment, but never fold those back into other emergent needs. That's not the kind of thinking that helps school districts to continue to grow and become more effective and to do right by the children who attend those schools.
Yep, and I see that these reductions are offset with some additional staff.
I mean, it goes, I'm sorry, Mr. It goes back to that first budget assumption that we talked about, that we think about our resources creatively. We will not ask this community to add resources until we have looked at our existing resources and made sure that we are using them effectively and in fact repurposing those when necessary. And I think this year's budget is a really good example of exactly that work.
I do want to
All
remind.
right, well, I appreciate it. Just want to come up with a number.
All right, well.
May I just interject something?
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci, you've done a great job as you always do. And I appreciate it about the, you pointed a picture about the difference between quantity and quality. And there's a bit of a trap in your presentation, just as a suggestion, where you show numbers of students over 7 years and then staffing requirement over 1 year without the total number of staff. So you just kind of open, the natural question becomes, why doesn't it just follow? And unless somebody's paying attention, this isn't 1415, the needs of the community and the complications of the world have changed. I get it, but if you could draw it out a little bit better in the presentation, you wouldn't run into these issues, I think.
It's a really good point, and I appreciate it. And I'd be happy to show a similar graph for staffing to complement the staff for the chart that we show for student enrollment.
Thank you.
Just on that point, which is an excellent point, I will take the opportunity to note that that last year's budget, if you recall, we reduced 6 English language arts teachers at Adams Middle School, among others. So it is certainly something we have been paying attention to and know we will have to continue to pay attention to, but that is an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. We have another presentation to get on, so get on with. So to the Board of Education and the Guilford Public Schools Administration, thank you. And we will see you again on March 2nd when you have a presentation to the public. And then we will start our discussions and deliberations moving forward. So thank you. Item number 7, receive the proposed town budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. And at this time, I will hand the virtual floor over to our first selectman, Matthew Hoey.
Are you doing so?
Hold on a second. Am I supposed to share your screen?
I've got slideshow, I've got the presentation up and in slideshow mode, so.
Okay, I apologize.
No, it should be Matt, if it's down, are you using your computer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the bottom, there should be a button that says share screen.
Yeah.
Got it.
Got it?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the capability to share it,
Yep.
even though I was host. It was already shared. There we go.
There you go. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the town's fiscal year 2022 budget. I'd additionally like to thank the members of the Board of Finance for your participation, your questions, and your contributions during our capital and budget presentations over the past couple of months. You have already informed our decisions and with some of those questions and concerns in the budget that is before you, which was approved unanimously by the Board of Selectmen on February 1st. I would also like to thank my fellow board members, some of which are here this evening. I believe Sandy and Sue are here because we had some great discussions. We had some challenges of each other's assumptions. We had concerns, but consistently the culture of collaboration that this Board of Selectmen has exhibited during the last 4 budget deliberations, and I can't believe it, we're already at the 4th one constituted that since this board was constituted. So I really want to thank my colleagues. Lastly, I want to thank the staff, my staff, your staff, Mary Jane, Karen, Mitch, and Tracy for helping prepare this document, this presentation, and the budget work in general. I think you've seen this slide before. This is our mission statement to some degree. These are the things that we feel that government is responsible for. This year, I'd like to focus in on 2. The 2 to the bottom right, town services and quality of life. And that's in reaction to the times we find ourselves in. Our emphasis this year is, as Dr. Freeman said, essentially on emerging needs in the town services arena, as we've seen dramatic impacts on the quality of life of so many who are facing increased needs and challenges during the coronavirus. Key factors and budget objectives for 21-22, as you can see, you can read. The first one, maintaining high level of services. State funding is always an uncertainty at this time of year. I can talk a little bit to that later when we get to the revenue section, but the governor, as I mentioned earlier, has already come out with his budget, and I will go into a little more detail later. We also find ourselves having to respond appropriately to short and long-term impacts of COVID-19. The challenge there is we don't know what the long-term impacts are, and we don't know if the short-term ones are going to turn out to be long-term ones. The other things you've seen before: providing essential safety and public protection services. The fund pension liabilities at the actuarial recommended level. So the budget you have in front of you today is at the with the assumed rate of 6%. And just as a little way of backdrop, the difference between 6.25 and 6 is about $220,000 in the Board of Selectmen's budget. We feel that it is a prudent investment. We also have, as you'll see in this budget, continued investment in information technology, and I will talk to that in a future slide. Maintaining high level of services. Excuse me. Let me get one more. There we go. Continued investment in maintaining infrastructure and roads. That's pretty much a yearly endeavor. We continue to strive to protect the tax relief programs of veterans, elderly, and disabled. This year, as we did last year, we grandfathered every participant in the Guilford programs moving forward. This is consistent with the capabilities that the governor gave us to do so with our local programs. Last thing we need to do is have seniors coming in and refiling and working with our assessor's office to refile documents. I know Bob has worked over the years with many seniors in terms of trying to forage through those programs and processes, and not having them have to come in, I think was the right thing to do. We also continue to try to enhance capital project funding within the operating budget. We hear this every year. This year is you'll see a significant increase. However, it is still lower than where we were at its highest in over a dozen years in 2018. Also, this budget does not rely on revenues from unassigned fund balance. As you may recall, last year, this board approved the use of $250,000 in fund balance to mitigate tax increases last year. Demographic changes mean increased demand on senior and social services. I believe it was Elizabeth Wilson was talking about the aging of our community in public forum earlier today. That's a reality, and the services that they are in need of are placing a significant amount of pressure on certain departments. Debt service, Chairman Ailes, this is your year. Finally, you predicted this during the campaign to get the high school passed. We're finally there where we have flattened out and actually dropped down a little bit after many years of increases to accommodate the Guilford High School debt. ECS, at this time of year, that's always a crapshoot with budgeting what the state is going to give us for education. And again, we'll talk to that a little bit later. Another key factor in this budget is the SAFER grant. The SAFER grant, as you may recall, was a tapered grant to add 8 firefighters to allow the community to gradually ease into those. We lose the last funding for those 8 new firefighter paramedics or firefighter EMTs, and the estimated cost to the town in terms of lost reimbursement between salaries and benefits is about $195,000. One thing to note, I think some of you who listened were on the budget presentations. There is an opportunity for us to apply for an extension on SAFER grants. We were hoping to have a determination of that prior to your meetings on March 2nd and March 4th. So stay tuned. That may dramatically impact next year's salary line item for the fire department, because apparently we might be in line for another $120,000 in SAFER grant monies for fiscal year 22. Lastly, this budget represents an increase of staff by of 3.5 full-time positions, and that's net of an elimination of 1 position and taking a part-time position up to a full-time position. More on that later. Here are the numbers. The total town's operating budget is anticipated to increase by $973,178, or a 3.2% increase. I have to tell you, the Board of Selectmen struggled with that number. That is a big number. Look at our friends at the Board of Education bringing in a budget at 1.49. But we see some different types of pressure, and we see some different needs. So again, unanimously, the Board of Selectmen moved that operating budget forward. In addition to the capital budget, which, as I indicated, increases by 12.28%. And debt service, Mike, here we go again. Finally, a drop in debt service, which, if you combine those 3 buckets, which very often gets attached to the town side of the budget, is a 2.43% overall spending increase for your consideration. We'll talk a little bit about what the Board of Selectmen did in its deliberations. Department budgets were reduced by the Selectmen to $172,247. And those came in a myriad of places. And literally, we were looking at line items as little as a couple $100. And we went back to our department heads and a couple of times, and they continue to come back with additional areas where they could save. They weren't significant, but still, we got to 172,000. The capital budgets, which traditionally come in high every year, the Board of Selectmen reduced that to by over 1.3 million, significantly more than we are actually asking for. And employee benefits, Mitch was able to come back and find an area where he felt he was comfortable in shaving something off. Let's take a look at the increases by major category of the town budget. Salaries is the biggest increase for a couple of reasons. The inherent steps that are in the budget contracts based on longevity and years of service. Employee benefits increases significantly. And I think we talked a little bit about the pension costs. Those numbers are rolled in there. However, all other operating expenses declined by almost $144,000. Capital obviously was up, as we have mentioned, and debt service was back down. I want to talk about the employee changes. This was a subject of significant deliberation by the Board of Selectmen. The process we normally use when we're going through these budgets is to look at budgets one at a time. However, we had requests for increases of 6 new positions in the budget. And thanks to Sue Renner, rather than try to look at them one at a time as we went through that individual department, we looked at them as a whole. We addressed all the new positions at one time together to try to figure out whether or not all of those needs matched up against the other departments. So I want to thank Sue for bringing some clarity to how we made the decisions relative to the new full-time positions. On the full-time side, what you see is a change from part-time bookkeeper, which is really going to be to a part-time bookkeeper / purchasing resource to full-time. We were able to accommodate that by removing the full-time counsel. As some of you may recall, Pam Millman retired. We did not replace Pam. We increased the use of the outside town counsel on a contractual basis, thereby eliminating a position. And Pam's role also include the purchasing agent role. So we will be molding some of those responsibilities into that bookkeeper position. So in effect, that nets out to about a half a full-time decrease. We'd like to add, and the board has approved adding an information technology system administrator. You may recall that a couple of years ago, there was an IT task force designed to look at the town requirements, the police department requirements, and the fire department requirements. That recommendation was for 2 additional personnel. We have 1 full-time IT resource for all of the town government functions, save for police and fire. That span of control is just unworkable and has been for a while. It has been identified as an issue for quite some time. So this budget includes someone to work with Tony Santarcangelo in working through the various IT issues and projects. Some of the major IT projects which have been delayed because we don't have the bandwidth or the resources to get it done. Next one is a maintainer 2 in Public Works. You may recall that I think this is the 3rd year in a row that the Public Works Commission has come in with a request for additional resources. They started 3 years ago asking for 2. We didn't grant any. Last year, we gave them 1. And this year they came back and asked if we would continue to consider it. And we have. An interesting little side piece for those who are paying attention during the budget presentation. Tom Fillion had submitted his budget, which called for adding a maintainer as well as his normal budgetary request. The commission had him revise that and basically offered that if we left a maintainer position in there, they would find another $50,000 to reduce in operating expenses as an offset. The next 2, I think, are directly related to coronavirus the COVID and the emerging needs in our community. Adding a social services program coordinator, we have an admin who is basically acting in that role as a program coordinator and trying to do the admin work themselves as well. A couple of years ago, the admin work was being done by volunteers. That is no longer a manageable situation. We don't have the volunteers, nor is it an appropriate way to run a professional office. So what is happening here is we're creating a new program coordinator position, which we anticipate moving the current admin into and hiring a new admin to replace the one moving up. We're also adding a school-based clinician at Adams Middle School. I think you heard earlier that the the health of our young students is of serious concern for the Board of Education as they are adding a social worker. We have actually had a school-based clinician assigned to Adams for a number of years. It was grant funded. We no longer have the grant funding. So we are requesting that that school-based clinician be added to our payroll. Just a quick note. I have been made aware, and again, I don't want to put pressure on my friends at the Board of Education, but I've been made aware that some of the COVID relief monies include a designation for a spending designation for support staff for student health and well-being. Clearly, I think there may be some funding opportunities for both of us in that. And earlier this evening, I had received some information from Rosa Delores' office about what is actually in the $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan that is being offered by the Biden administration. And for Connecticut, there is $1.6 billion for the local education agencies. And as Dr. Freeman pointed out, we usually do not get the lion's share of those kind of monies. However, and this is not guaranteed, please, the money that is anticipated at this point, based on the formulas they are currently using, out of that 1.6 billion coming to Connecticut local education agencies, Guilford would get 971,000 of it. 20% of that has to be used for 20% is a minimum number used for learning loss, and the remaining funds go for safely reopening schools and addressing lost time in classrooms, repairing ventilation systems, reducing class sizes, social distancing strategies, PPE, personal protective equipment, and then, as I mentioned, student health and well-being. So that's just something to tuck away. And I think Katie, Dr. Freeman will be talking about that as we go forward. But what I'm suggesting is there may be some relief to this budget in offset of some salary line items, at least for this fiscal year. And again, there's an opportunity perhaps to spread it out over more time. There are also some other changes to employees. Part-time, we've already added a part-time sanitarian. The busiest employee in the town of Guilford right now is our health director, Sonia Marino. And I think my friends at the Board of Education will tell you what a wonderful job she's been doing, helping, advising, contact tracing, and helping actually make decisions on how we safely conduct the operation of our schools. And then there are obviously all the contact tracing on the non-school affecting individuals, including 7 individuals in Public Works and a couple over at our waste transfer station that happened over the last week and a half. So that part-time sanitarian has been out doing septic and restaurant inspections. So that is already built into the budget. Our health director had asked for a new position, and that was an environmental health technician, because we just aren't getting to the number of inspections that we need to do on a regular basis. The board declined to give that a full-time position. Instead, we are going to use a contract arrangement. Some of you may be familiar with our former health director, who has been contacted and is potentially interested in working on a contract basis. Additionally, we have already added 2 contracted part-time assistant building officials because of the needs in that department. I think you've seen, Mike, you were looking at some of the building permit information. One thing that needs to be clarified is that even if we had the same number of permits as we as we did in 2018, the workload is extremely different. In 2018, they passed legislation changing the requirements for building inspections for single-family homes or for additions or for certain things. In the case of a single-family home, it went from 8 to 13 different inspections. On the commercial side, there was an increase of about 20% on the commercial side as well. So just keeping up with those increased requirements is significant. There's been some discussion, we had it last year about, do we go and hire a full-time building official? Well, at this point, we're willing to work through this year and make an assessment as to whether or not we take these part-timers, and these are a couple of part-timers, but we also have one longstanding part-timer, George Godot, who handles who works almost exclusively on the large commercial projects. This will give us an opportunity to assess whether or not we want to go to 2 full-time building officials as opposed to the 1 full-time and these part-time individuals. So long way to get to a net increase in full-time employees of 3.5, which is a net change to the budget of nearly $160,000. Okay, other increases in employee benefits. I mentioned I've already beaten to death the discount rate, so you can see the change in the retirement plan contributions, and that's all of the retirement contributions. So just the pension itself accounts for better than 2/3 of that $321,000 increase. Medical benefits decreased similarly to the way they did on the Board of Education side, and that was an agreement that was reached between the Board of Ed and the town. Mary Jane and Linda had worked diligently on this. We've taken a nominal risk here. These are not the actual recommended by our insurance consultant, but what we have done is we've taken a look at the recent trends on those consultants' projections versus what we've actually been doing, and we have beaten those estimates, which is why our surplus in the medical account has grown over time. So the potential use of that surplus is an obvious fallback position, which allowed us to make this decision. Reserve for personnel is, we have, Mitch, forgive me, I think we have 4 contracts up this year, or 3 contracts up this year.
We have four
the 4
bargaining agreements. Yep.
Yep, we have 4 contracts up this year. So that includes a provision for increases in as a result of those negotiations. So total employee benefits, $420,000, or a 5.2% increase. All right, some specific increases in the operating budget. Information systems, I think we talked that one to death. That's a new position. In the insurance line item, which is Mitch's baby, this now includes new policy for cyber insurance and for active assailant incidents. God forbid a Sandy Hook incident, but this is now becoming a prevalent insurance policy that school districts throughout the state are now engaging in. There's also some increases in our traditional policy, our liability and our claims policies are up a little bit. Mitch, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we're just looking at the workers' comp has gone up, and that's part of what's driving that.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Building, obviously that predominantly reflects those 2 new, even though they're already on the payroll now, not payroll, but they're already being contract employees. That 73,000 represents those 2 individuals. Public Works is largely a new position. Police Department is in salary in a couple areas. Steps obviously is one of them. Their contract was settled last year, so that includes their salary increases in addition to the steps. There's some other increases in training. Some of them are also related to health as a result of the legislation that was passed last year by on the Police Accountability Act. Fire Department, Safer Grant is the culprit, is the large culprit here, as well as replacement salaries. So lastly, employee benefits, and I said, I think I beat that to death a couple of minutes ago. We also had some reductions in the operating budget. Not significant, but they are there. The registrar of voters basically is, no presidential primary, and we're not anticipating a local primary for the local elections. In legal, I talked a little bit earlier about how we revamped the legal purchasing agent function. And the legal line item is down by $95,000. But there's a good portion of that is related to our labor negotiations. Even though you're scratching your head, wait a minute, we got 4 contracts coming up. Well, we had 4 contracts last year that we did not spend the money on, and we are carrying in force. So it will be available to us because we have already started those negotiations. So that money will be available to us to augment the budget for 2022. The next one of note, town properties. The largest portion of this is in the re-rating by the water company for hydrant rentals, believe it or not. Our estimate is to go down about $107,000, but as Mary Jane will be quick to tell you, not in that number are the new hydrants for the 3 neighborhoods with a water main project, Mulberry Point, Long Cove, and Tuttle's Point. So we'll see, probably see an uptick or in the hydrant rentals. We will know that. We probably won't know that until possibly sometime after this budget is established. And then another savings in there, about $18,000, as I mentioned earlier, is street lighting. And the debt number, we didn't have any control over that. That was cast in stone a while ago. The major components of our capital budget are anything over $25,000. There are several vehicles that under that number, but engineering is sidewalks. Our reserve for sidewalk repairs and new ones, but predominantly for repair. At the fire department, we're looking at vehicles, defibrillation equipment, as well as hazmat equipment. Park and recreation, drainage and fencing at Baldwin, because there's a major project going on at Baldwin with some of those on that property, and this is the appropriate time to do that kind of work. They also have some power equipment, a mower, a new F350 with a lift gate, and a new John Deere tractor. The police department, that's largely vehicles. $187,000 for vehicles and components. This is one of the years where we're replacing more vehicles than we normally do. Last year it was only a couple. Those are on a rotational scale. And also in that number, the other major component of that number is our 5-year taser replacement program. At Public Works, we're replacing basically obsolete and rotting out pickup trucks, a mobile truck lift, which is invaluable for our Public Works garage because they can move them from bay to bay, garage to garage. And one thing, this will not be stranded investment if we ever move the Public Works facility out of the current location. We'll be able to, that would be a portable piece of equipment which we'd be able to bring to a new facility, as much as the forklift would. And then, of course, there's other things in here like brand new plows and drainage projects. So let's take a look at the capital projects. You guys have become familiar with this over time. As you can see, we had gradually started to raise capital funding in the operating budget and had gotten pretty successful. We had increased it by 25% or more from 2014 to 2018. But based on the budgetary pressures over the last couple of years, and the unfortunate position of when cuts are asked of the Board of Selectmen, that typically is the easiest area for us to go to, and we just kick the can down the road and push some projects out. So we're pleased to see this curve start to that trend line start to go back up. Okay, components of the operating revenue budget. I did mention that I would talk to this a little bit earlier. For those who've been in this game for a couple of years, at this point, these are estimates. These are only estimates because it's unlikely that the legislature will even get a budget out by the time they convene in June. This is going to be a challenging year, I think. However, the governor put a stake in the ground, and we're gonna ride that recommendation, because we think it's the governor has put some pressure on the legislature to not damage funding for municipalities this year. He has basically said, we're going to keep everyone whole, despite the fact that there was legislation passed a couple of years ago that would have decreased for many communities in the state, or communities like Guilford, our ECS funding. However, the statutory grants that we received last year in the governor's budget are projected to be exactly the same. So let's start with the local, on the local side. Interest income, we talked about that earlier today. That's going to take a significant hit. I think all of us wish that we would be able to get a little better return on our cash deposits, but as we talked earlier, we can't put this in the stock market the way some of our retirement portfolios are receiving such positive news. Building permits this was a projection from our building official. I personally think this is an area where we can come back and increase it, particularly as you saw in the revenue reports earlier tonight on the town side. They're currently at, I think, 63% of their budget, which suggests that we could keep the budget flat from this year. However, that may be one of those areas that we're offsetting the increase in the fire hydrant rental, so it may not be a big win, but there is an opportunity here. This is something we'd be happy to talk to the Board of Finance about in your deliberations on March 2nd and 4th. Town clerk recording fees, et cetera, are anticipated to go up and continue to go up. EMS revenue, the fire department continues to be active, and those revenues are anticipated to grow by 30,000. Delinquent taxes and interest nominal. Use of fund balance. This budget does not project the use of fund balance. We'll leave that to the discretion of the Board of Finance, but our recommendation is not to utilize fund balance. And other local revenues are down nominally. So you can see that state grants and Board of Ed stuff remains flat. Okay, the good news that many of you probably heard about was there was significant grand list growth this year. And it predominantly came it came in net taxable personal property as well as motor vehicles. Real estate, not as much. However, that 1.42% increase is generating $1,389,000 in new money, which certainly goes some way to offset the two increases that the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen are asking for. For Data Geeks, this is how it broke down relative to real estate, residential, commercial, farmland, et cetera, motor vehicles, personal property. Okay. Again, This is Board of Selectmen estimated state grant revenue, as we talked about. This is a little more detail for those who want to get peel back the onion, but the bottom line is it's the same as last year. And by the way, even though the governor in his budget presentation included that ESSER 2 money, we did not include it in this budget to offset as a revenue source, and that's $261,000, which we feel belongs goes directly to the Board of Education. This is a slide that we put in every year and just breaks out the three major components of the debt service: the schools, the new Guilford High School, and then the town bonding as well. Another tribute to Chairman Hales. This was a document we started many years ago to talk to show the impact of the Guilford High School debt service. Well, this is the year that we're finally on that downward curve. Okay, I want to take a, well, let me finish this and then I'll wrap up with something else. Significant budget highlights. We reduced the department budget request by 172,000. Capital by over 1.3 million. Operating expenses without salaries decreased by 2.35%. Salaries 4.29%, including reserve funding for contracts to be negotiated. We increased the capital funding levels. State funding estimates are based on prior year. Every year we ask that you consider the unfunded liability, and you guys have done that. The Board of Finance has done that for consecutive years. We will be coming back to you as we anticipate the final documents on establishing the OPEB trust, and we'll be looking to see if the board is willing to set aside some additional funds out of the medical reserve account to continue to fund this. Mary Jane, what are the current operating budget costs for OPEB? Do you have that handy or on the tip of your tongue?
On an ongoing basis, monthly? No, I'm afraid I don't have that information.
There's a number somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 is something that I had recalled at one point. I don't know if that number is anywhere near accurate, but we'll get that number for you. But obviously, the idea here is to wean ourselves off of the pay-as-you-go for OPEB and build a trust so that, like the pension, that is actually paying the benefit. Okay, if I could wrap up for a minute. I think most of you are used to seeing a spreadsheet that details what's the impact of all of this. We've taken the liberty of doing that, and we'll share this with you shortly. The net effect is a total of $1.938 million in new money, which is a 1.87% spending increase over the previous year. If we were to run out the mill rate based on the new grand list, the mill rate increase would be 0.39, which reflects a 1.21% tax increase. Clearly the lowest that the two boards have brought to the Board of Finance in recent memory. So with that, I want to thank the board for their consideration of this budget and urge that you work earnestly with us or in the next couple of sessions to validate the assumptions that the Board of Selectmen has arrived at relative to the needs that are included in this budget, and hopefully feel that you can move it forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Very much appreciated. Again, I will reiterate somewhat of what I did before with the Board of Education. Thank you to the Board of Selectmen and all the departments in crafting these budgets. As I had also mentioned, this was a bit of a formality. However, when it comes to the revenues and other items that the first selectman went over, they are somewhat fluctuating. So we knew about the expenses, but the revenue is a moving target based on the governor's budget and other items. So we will have, again, plenty of time to talk about this at our March 2nd and March 4th meetings. I would ask if anybody has a real pressing issue or question to ask. Otherwise, we will move forward. It's getting late. I want to be respectful of everyone's time as much as possible because we've all been on this call for going on almost 3 hours. So anything for our first selectman in the presentation? Otherwise, we'll move on in the agenda.
I've got two, but I'll make them as brief as possible if they're.
Please do.
We can take the time.
Sure.
Okay, so I just have a similar line of questioning for Mr. Hoey too about the new positions. I did back of the envelope calculations and I figured there was about 8 positions that were new. And now I'm coming up with maybe 7, with 3 being contracted. So I'm wondering if I can also email you as well, Matt, and just try to get to the right number.
Absolutely, Jonathan. And feel free to call me as well if you just want to talk
All right.
through.
I appreciate it. And then the only other question was, I was trying to understand the new structure of legal. And I'm not sure if I do or not, but I had a kind of a weird question. I think we budget 90,000 for general legal expenses.
Right.
And then another 50,000 or so for labor negotiations.
Right.
Will those come out of the 100,000 pool of hours that we're going to contract for? Or is that addition? Those are all additional hours.
Those are additional hours. So,
Okay.
And those are additional hours. Those net off of the 118,000 we were paying Pam Millman.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and actually, that $100,000 is a very conservative number because those contracted hours are, it's with the same attorney, our town council, but those hours that he is actually here in the building and he has set hours to, that he works are billed at half his normal billing rate.
It seemed like a positive restructuring of legal for sure. And I was hoping it was even more powerful. Is this decrease to the purchasing agent also impact the legal line?
Pam was the purchasing agent. She was in-house counsel and purchasing agent, all in one.
Okay. Is that a further decrease though in the legal?
Yeah, that's all in. That was all in the legal budget. And
okay, it was in the original
right.
paperwork from the last meeting.
And there's also an administrative assistant in the legal budget who handles a lot of the day-to-day stuff with purchasing.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah.
Matt, you had alluded to the fact that the sheet that we usually get, the revenue summary and mill rate calc sheet, that is something that you will, I know it's fluid on the revenues, I get that, but you would be able to do a snapshot for us as far as where we stand?
Absolutely, we'll get that out to you. Mary Jane can get that to you.
Very much appreciated. It's very helpful. I'm going to stop sharing your screen because we're going to move on, if that's okay with everyone. All right, item number 8, committee reports. I think we've talked about building permits a little bit, so I think we can move on from that unless anyone has anything else. I do have a few items under old business and new business, so I want to move on to that. For item number 9, old business, last month under new business, we talked about, and I'm going to focus here on our first selectman and anyone else who has any feedback on in-person voting and the process that we're going to go through this year. I know it's on all of our minds. We do have a March 2nd and March 4th, our meetings. As you may recall, last year on March 2nd, March 4th, we met in person. It was the last 2 times we met in person, I believe. And at that point, we all went virtual. Mr. Hoey, have you heard any indications regarding that. And I know that there are municipalities that are already asking questions about what other communities are doing because they're being told by their health departments that they will not be able to do in-person voting. They've already been shut down on a few municipalities. I'm just wondering where we may stand for planning purposes before I go into new business, because then I have other items in new business that might actually be addressed by this. If you, yeah.
For those of
Go
you who
ahead.
are old, for those of you who are old enough to remember this, Groucho Marx and the $64,000 question, you just asked it. I have continued to push the issue through CCM as well as through our legislative delegation. There has been no movement to date. The crux of this matter is in two places. One is, can you conduct in-person town meetings? And at this point, you're right. There are a lot of folks saying, no, you can't do those. However, hybrid meetings may well be able to be taking place relatively soon. In some instances, I think they can already. The challenge with doing town meetings in a hybrid fashion or in a Zoom fashion is, how do you validate the voters? The big challenge would be the annual budget meeting, which allows the voters to vote up or down whether or not to send it to referendum. And it's actually a requirement for them to do that, to send it. But they also have the opportunity to vote out a budget lower than what you actually recommend. So as I think I mentioned to you, one of the things that we have the capacity to do based on an existing state statute is to move the dates on our referendums, our budget setting meetings and referendum. We have the ability to move that without doing a charter revision because our dates are established in the charter. So the thought was for us to move the annual budget meeting to the week after you guys reported out, which would then give us 6 weeks to do absentee voting. Because I think we saw how successfully we were able to do that during the presidential election. And the reason we need that flexibility to move those dates is because we typically have the annual budget meeting a week before the budget. If that budget were to have been reduced at that meeting, any absentee ballots that we had printed out earlier are worthless. So what is being considered is another executive order to allow no excuse absentee ballots. If that's the case, we may be able to do what I just described, which was to create enough of a window between those two events, the referendum and the annual budget meeting, that we could effectively do both in-person and absentee ballots. The alternative, which I understand is very unpalatable up in Hartford, is for the governor to do the same thing he did last year, which is to give you folks the authority to establish the budget. So it's, again, I have been working with CCM, I have been working with cost and directly with our legislative delegation to try to get some clarity around it. And we're not the only ones in the state who are facing this same problem. So again, I don't have a definitive answer for you other than the fact, and by the way, the CCM actually hired an attorney, Steve Mednick, who's done some work. For those who are familiar with Steve Mednick, he's done some work for us on the affordable housing project. But the CCM actually hired him to go and lobby the governor's office on this specific issue. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
Are referendums out of the question?
I don't think so. I think, but the challenge here is how do we effectively do that? Will people show up to do it?
Matt, I have a question. In the absence of another executive order, wouldn't we just follow the town charter?
Yes, we would.
Okay. This isn't important to me just as a member of the Board of Finance. This is just important to me as a citizen.
Agreed. Agreed.
it's
And Jonathan, I
important to
think
all of us.
what I was mostly concerned about, I think, when I first introduced this concept to you was the disenfranchisement of a significant number of people who are reluctant to come out and vote in person. So because of the way that we do our annual budget meeting and the referendum within a week or,
2 weeks.
not less than a week, not more than 2 weeks of each other,
Yeah.
there is the potential that we're disenfranchising a significant portion of the population, particularly those who haven't been vaccinated, who may not feel comfortable coming out and doing it. More than half of the votes during the presidential election held in November were absentee in Guilford. So my concern, we already have such a woeful turnout for our budget referendums. This could drive it into depths that we've never seen. We're lucky to get 17 or 18 or 20% of the eligible voters showing up for a referendum. And then the thought that less than 10% of the voters are the ones that are determining whether this budget is appropriate or not. We could have some philosophical discussions about that. So that's why disenfranchising any voters to reduce the percentage of the ones that would actually vote and determine the future of this community, should be considered, which is why I would love to see that absentee ballot, no excuse voting, or whatever they call it. I don't know the term of art these days.
I think there's 2 points. I was gonna make 2, but I'm gonna make a third one. Jonathan, I totally understand your view on this. I think we all do. So not to continue to reiterate it, and I respect you doing that. I don't think any of us want to go through what we went through last year. We would much prefer having voters come out and vote on a budget. I don't want to be in that position that we were in last year, for lots of different reasons, but most of all for exactly what you state, which is we want the voters to come out and justify and clarify and confirm what our decisions are, and our recommendations. Not our decision, it's our recommendation, and the voters have that right to not accept that recommendation or accept it. So I think the other thing I want to say is that it's really out of our hands at this particular moment as a board. We have a first selectman, we have numerous representatives that are trying to work to get this into a position where we can have voters come out and vote. In the meantime, that's where I wanted to go into new business, just to state a little bit more about where we stand. I had one issue before we go into that, but just for a recap. So I think we're all set with the $64,000 question, right? That we don't really have an answer, and it's out of our control, and we've got representatives and stakeholders are doing everything they can to get the public to vote. Is there anything else under old business? Okay, new business before I move on into the budget process. I wanted to make a note, Matt, regarding the elderly tax relief program. This is a question that came up, and I don't think we officially addressed it at any of our meetings, but I believe, I'm fairly certain that I read that there is about the application process, that if you're a new applicant, you need to file applications for the program. If you are in the program as an existing member of the program, you are not required this year to fill out an application. Is that correct? And can you just confirm that?
Mike, you're absolutely correct. Everyone who is in the program, any of those tax relief programs, are grandfathered. They are automatically extended by another year without having to reapply. And you're correct. If you are not in the program, but you feel that you can qualify, you need to send in another application.
Okay, thank you. So I'll make sure that was confirmed. That's what I thought. So the other items really are all related to the budget process. At this particular moment, it appears, as we know, that everything's going to be virtual as opposed to last year, at least in the budget hearings and the workshop. So for the public, I just wanted to reiterate and remind everyone that the public budget hearing will be on Tuesday, March 2nd at 7:30 p.m. There will be an expected public forum after the presentations by the Town and Board of Education. I have to admit, I would like to have public forum in this Zoom world. I've also, we've, I think, done a pretty good job not having issues. I'm going to knock on some wood regarding public interference. But I would like to, make sure that we try to have public forum after, just like we have every other year, only virtually. How that works, we'll figure it out for the public. The workshop, Board of Finance public workshops would be scheduled for Thursday, March 4th and Monday, March 8th at 7:30 p.m. if needed. And again, at both of those, there would be public forum. It is possible, and I don't know how this will go because we will need to deliberate and talk. It is possible that we may use both nights this year. And the reason I'm saying that is, a lot of times we meet in person and we get this done on the first workshop night. There's a possibility that if we have more questions or we want more public input, which will be my next point, that we may actually have that Monday meeting to allow for more public input. I'm saying that because last year it was very much needed, I think, to get a lot of public feedback in a time where a lot of people didn't have that chance to come out. Now, that being said, we should be able to entertain both public comment or public response, both in writing and virtually. And last year, I thought we had a really, really great process. In fact, I re-looked at it on our website, and it still has all the information pretty much from last year on how to send comments to the Board of Finance regarding the budget. I would like to entertain that, and I not for a motion or anything, but I do believe that we can post information on the website about the, to allow for public comment, to send an email to an address that was already established and do what we did last year, so we can get those on March 2nd or March 4th, or if we decide to move forward on March 8th and use that date. So I wanted to ask Matt, Tracy, others, if we could open up that portal, so to speak, or that opportunity for people to make public comments on the website and update it so that it's clear that comments could be made for our meetings on the 2nd and 4th. And
Mike, can I make one comment on that?
Let me just finish real quick. What I would expect to do, and I made a note of it here, is that we would entertain submissions of emails or written comments, and I would highly encourage it that they be read, but also we have the opportunity to summarize. Last year we received, if you remember, 190 emails. I don't think the intent would be to read 190 emails, and I don't think we're going to have as much time and as much issue as we did last year starting the process ultimately over again. But I want to be a little bit more proactive this year before our the budget hearing and the workshop. So Jonathan, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, just like our resident Elizabeth Wilton said earlier, a lot of our Guilford residents are growing older, and maybe we do still need to put something like this in the newspaper.
I agree. I would hope, Matt, Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balstracy, I would hope that there is, articles, I don't see any press on our call, but I would hope that some sort of press release about, what's going on in town gets in the paper. Now, whether we, I think we could certainly say that the information is on the website and do a quick little, press release, so to speak, that, the town and the schools are entertaining public comment to the Board of Finance for their meetings, and just have something in the paper. I think that'd be a great idea to make sure that everyone, as much coverage as we can to provide comments, and response would be great. But again, I think getting in the newspaper, getting it up on the website, I don't know how many people have done, have been watching GCTV in these meetings. We don't have the opportunity right now to also publicize this through a GCTV program or, do that in a recording. So any way we can get the word out to receive comment from the public should be entertaining. Matt, go ahead.
And Mike, we'll do, we will do whatever's necessary to get the word out relative to trying to solicit input from the community. We'll use our various social media outlets. We'll use a press release if need be. It's not unusual for Jesse Williams to miss Board of Selectmen meetings, Board of Finance meetings, and then go watch the meetings later on. So my suspicion is he will probably be watching this at his convenience as opposed to, tonight. And clearly, I've of recent had more interactions with the reporter from the Patch and as well as the Shoreline Times, Sarah Page Kurz, and I have had several interactions over the last couple of weeks. So I can certainly reach out to those folks. They're always looking for column inches, stories and column inches. So
There's also social media.
that's it. Yeah, we use our social media venues. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not abnormal for me to get a phone call from Jesse after the fact also. So yeah, I didn't mean to call him out that he's not here, but you want to make sure that things are out in a timely manner for public comment. So that's great. Thank you, Matt, for reassuring us on that. Is there anything else anyone would like to add under new business before we do go into public forum as our last item? All right, item number 11, public forum. Anybody wishing to address the board in public forum? I see a familiar face. I believe we have Elizabeth Wilson again. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
I'm still here, and I'm impressed that you guys.
I give you big kudos to sticking it out. So thank you for sticking it out.
Well, kudos to all of you too. Long evening. I just one suggestion when you're talking about email solicitation for comments and not being able to potentially to read the entire email. Since public comment is limited to 3 minutes, why don't you limit the word count for emails that would be read? And I had timed what I read at the beginning, and it was 358 words, just as.
And you were within the 3 minutes, so.
I was, yeah.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, because we have gotten some long emails before, and it is hard. You can't read all of them in the comment. The meetings would be much longer. So thank you for that suggestion. Appreciate it. Anybody else wishing to address the board? With that, we will see you all at our special budget meeting on March 2nd. And at this time, good seeing everybody.
Move for adjourn.
There it is. There's my entertainment. And do I have a second?
Second.
Everyone seconds at the same time. Thank you, everyone, for sticking it out, and have a wonderful evening. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.